Paducah, Kentucky is home to longtime couple Keith and Julie Griffith.
They had been together for years and years. They were together when they were in junior high school and high school, and they got married. And so far as I recall, they didn't really have any problems.
After raising 2 children during their 33-year marriage, these empty nesters are happily involved with their local church and its motorcycle group, the Faith Riders.
They seem like they just went together. They just seem to mesh.
Ooh, hey, you hippie. Someone needs a haircut.
Yeah, I was thinking of growing it. You know, you used to love it when it was long, remember?
Yeah, those days are long gone, Easy Rider. Thanks for the ride.
But they've started to drift apart.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Ever since Keith retired from his job at the local water company to become a traveling salesman.
Majority of the time, he was on the road, 4 to 5 days out of the week, typically.
What a good girl. You give me that, Cleo.
Meanwhile, Julie busies herself, pampering her 4-legged baby
Give me a kiss.
and spending time with the Faith Riders.
Hey, everybody. It's shake and bake sale day.
Keith was always out of town, so she was a lot more involved with the group than Keith was.
I got lots more of these.
Oh, there it is. Julie's famous lemonade. We can already count this fundraiser a success.
I'm just going to test it.
No, you have to pay for that.
Oh, he's so cheeky.
Julie was one of those people that if life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So if he was gone, she was going to find something to do.
While Julie has a wide circle of friends, Keith is lonely on the road. So he strikes up conversations with the people he meets along the way.
Hey there. Nice looking machines you got in there.
Thanks for noticing. Oh, you mean the lawnmowers?
Yeah. Hi. Delilah.
Including Delilah Culver, a 47-year-old divorcee and Indiana resident.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Casual conversation somehow turns into dinner.
Essentially, her work and his work at that time was similar.
It was just a business relationship or a friendship, so to speak.
Except for one tiny detail.
Divorce is really, really hard.
It's hard. Oh, yeah, it's weird. I don't know why I wear it. It's been a couple of years, and it just feels weird not having it.
Well, it's nice to meet someone who understands. I have a really, really early start tomorrow.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Let me get this.
Oh, all right.
Back at home, Keith sets out to be the best husband he can be, starting with his honey-do list.
Oh, my gosh. Are you working on the deck?
Her deck was very important to her. She loved her deck.
What brought this on?
Well, I've been promising you this for years, Jules.
Thank you.
Take this.
Okay.
I think Keith did some of the things in the home to make it look like I'm still here, I'm still involved.
But despite the appearance of marital unity, Keith is not 100% there. He and Delilah still meet occasionally.
They would go to restaurants, maybe go to some bars and watch sports. They kind of acted like buddies.
Until Delilah's birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
How about a nightcap back at the hotel?
At that time, Keith was overweight.
I'm actually seeing someone. His name's Calvin.
Of course. Yeah, would you like me to get you a cab?
No need. Thanks for the chocolates. I think it would be best if we didn't do this anymore.
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell see trouble ahead for Keith and Julie.
Typically, affairs actually happen if there are two components, desire and opportunity. And Keith being away as a traveling salesman creates that opportunity in a higher level than he's ever had before. And so as long as the desire component is there, he's got the perfect package for betrayal.
It would be one thing if Keith appeared to be sort of reevaluating how he was going to spend the remaining years of his life and whether he was with the right person, with Julie. That doesn't appear to be what he's thinking. He appears to be thinking about trying to have a relationship outside of the marriage and still keep Julie in the dark at home. And that concerns me much more, that his mind is going to a I want to have my cake and eat it too place.
The Griffiths are further apart than ever. Keith abandons the deck project.
He tore off the outside part and he just left it laying there.
Keith had removed all the deck boards, the flooring from the deck, which exposed the beams. And this went on for a couple of months.
You around this weekend?
I don't know what's going on this weekend. What's up?
Well, John said that he's not busy, and I thought that maybe you guys could work on the deck. Yeah, have some beer and some pizza and just kind of make it fun.
This weekend's no good for me, okay?
I said, I can come over whenever and help you with it. And it always puzzled me that, you know, he would never respond.
But he's offered to help.
Look, I said I'd get to it when I get to it, all right? Now just get off my back.
Nice and slow.
Instead of renovating his home, Keith focuses on renovating himself.
Oh, I'm proud.
In early 2013, he has gastric bypass surgery.
Doing good. Let's take those off. Oh, my goodness, you're doing so well. Here, why don't you lie down? That's it. Okay.
His cholesterol was high. He was overweight. His sugar was high. And that would help all of that, which all made perfect sense.
Thanks, Jules.
No, of course.
His recovery is quick. In mere months, he springs back light as a feather.
He lost more than 100 pounds, and he was working at it. I mean, he'd get out and walk and walk and walk.
I was like, wow, I mean, what a transformation. And she's like, I know, didn't he look great? You know, I'm so proud for him.
But the new slim Keith is about to get caught in a web of deception that might not hold the weight of his lies.
It was very obvious that he thought, hey, I look pretty good now, and I know it.
Surprise.
There was nothing she could do, and she knew that.
Traveling salesman Keith Griffith loses more than 100 pounds, and Julie, his wife of 36 years, couldn't be more proud. But it doesn't take long for pride to turn to irritation.
You can look. She can't touch. Well, not yet at least.
We rarely went anywhere that someone didn't come over to him and go, Keith, is that you? I didn't recognize you. You've lost so much weight.
Before the surgery, he was just a really easygoing personality. But after the surgery, not so much. He had that aura of cockiness about him after he lost the weight.
What was that?
What?
Pathetic.
The tensions continue into the fall.
She was burning leaves. And they caught on fire. It moved into the woods quicker than she thought it was going to. And of course, she was home alone. And she called Chuck Jordan.
Shoot. Chuck, I was burning some leaves and the woods have caught fire. What do I do?
I'm the Sunday school teacher, and I get a lot of calls from people in my Sunday school class about a lot of different things. I told Julie to call the fire department.
Yeah, right. Okay, sorry, just a little frantic here. Thanks.
Why didn't you call me?
You weren't here.
I bet you called Chuck.
He made that comment that he felt like he was losing Julie. Maybe it makes sense, is he was losing her to the church, to the class, to her the group of friends. That's the only thing I can come up with.
After more than 2 years of silence, Keith texts Delilah out of the blue.
Keith inquired with Delilah by asking, did you cast a spell on me? That he couldn't get her off of his mind.
Well, clearly he was still smitten with her, and he asked her to meet him at a very expensive restaurant, a steakhouse in Indianapolis, and they did.
Keith, is that you? Wow. You look fantastic.
I think by losing 100 pounds, I think that Keith was more attractive to Delilah.
Well, you look great too.
The pretext of dinner is to celebrate Delilah's first book.
To your literary career.
It's almost a perfect evening, except for frequent interruptions from Calvin.
Are you still,
No, it's over. He's just not accepting it.
She continued to take texts and get calls. The guy was calling her up and was just bugging her to death.
But, there. He's not going to bother us anymore.
Sort of propelled them into greater friendship that night, and they had just a great time.
By the autumn of 2013, Keith's efforts to court Delilah appear to be paying off. To the point that Delilah accompanies Keith to have corrective laser eye surgery.
He wanted to do it up there where she could, take care of him. He was so close to that girl that he was not having sex with that he wanted her to do it. That was really peculiar.
She did not know that he was having it done.
Hey, Jules.
Hey!
Surprise. No glasses.
Wait, you got surgery?
In Indiana. It's amazing.
It was a complete surprise to Julie. She was aggravated, but there was nothing she could do, and she knew that.
His whole head and his life was someplace else, was someone else.
And shockingly, that someone else is now in the hospital. Keith rushes to Delilah's side in Indianapolis the very next day.
It was Calvin. Calvin, you scared me. What are you doing?
This Calvin guy tried to, forced her in the car with him and was threatening to kill her and all this kind of stuff.
Get in the car.
No, I am not getting into the car. This is... Stop! Stop!
So worried.
Keith has not been showing much regard or much interest in Julie's feelings for a long time. And yet, when Delilah is injured, Keith races to her side and he's being compassionate to Delilah because he wants something from Delilah. He's not being compassionate to Julie because he no longer wants anything from Julie.
Whether he loves one of these women or both of these women, what's very clear to me is that he's lying to both of these women. And so that tells me that there's a level of emotional detachment. There's a level of disrespect. There are people that would minimize what's going on between Keith and Delilah. They might call it a friendship. They might call it an affair of the heart that hasn't gone anywhere. But what I see is a ton of lies and a ton of betrayal.
Julie and Keith have always been tight-lipped about their marriage. But it's clear they're having problems.
When we were on vacation in November, he was always connected to his work. I always felt like he was there in person, but not there in his mind.
What is he doing? Probably sexting a secret girlfriend.
She even made a joke about him having another girlfriend in one of his sales regions.
But there are other, more serious indications that something is wrong.
I'm sorry, Jules. I have to work on December 31st in Kentucky. They need me.
What, on New Year's Eve?
He said, I'm going to be out of town over New Year's. I need you guys to entertain Julie.
Can take care of you.
And her reaction was, what traveling salesman works on New Year's Eve?
Really? Are you sure you have to work New Year's?
I have to take this call.
In hindsight, yes, I do think that she may have had suspicions.
Delilah, too, is growing suspicious.
I don't get it. What's going on, Keith? You just said that your wife is still on your insurance.
My ex-wife, I meant. Obviously.
He let it slip that his wife and his ex-wife and he still shared an insurance policy. By that time, Mr. and Mrs. Griffith were supposed to have been divorced 5 years.
Why is she still on your insurance?
We were together a long time. Old habits.
Listen, if you want to be with me, you have to get her out of your life altogether, all right?
Keith told her he was a fixer. He said he would fix the problem.
In fact, he's ready to make a move.
I hate not being able to see you more. That we're so far apart. We could live in the same city.
But what will be the cost of his double-barreled deceit?
Like any wife would feel after 36 years of marriage, betrayed.
Fix it!
She would have confronted him, wondering where the money was.
Julie Griffith is beginning to suspect that Keith, her husband of 36 years, may be deceiving her. But she has no idea that he's pursuing another woman named Delilah. Winter brings on the new year and a fresh supply of marital problems when Keith returns home from his trip.
Happy New Year's, Jules.
Who's Delilah?
It was a card that had been sent to Keith by his other woman, his lady friend. And it was a little more than just a I'm a buddy card.
What can I say? My clients love me. Just like you, right? Right?
Despite Julie's suspicions, Keith doesn't hesitate to leave her at home by herself while he goes off on yet another business trip.
I think as far as Julie knew, he was on a regular sales trip. Nothing out of the ordinary.
But of course, it's not an ordinary trip at all. Keith is meeting Delilah.
He bought her things. He, not only gave her nice gifts, but he made car payments for her. He gave her money.
Julie would have been furious if she'd have known he was giving other people money when they were struggling.
That January night, Keith checks into his hotel room nearby around 9 p.m. alone.
See you tomorrow, all right?
You bet. At night.
220 miles away, Julie heads home from church, also alone. few hours later, firefighters and police raced to the Griffith property.
When the first responders arrived at the Griffith residence, it was a ball of fire. It was totally engulfed in flames.
We had no idea if anyone was or was not inside.
Hello?
I received a call at approximately 3:15 in the morning from Craig County Sheriff's Department. So I got dressed, got in my cruiser, and drove out to the scene.
In time to see the firefighters extinguish the last licks of flame.
She answered?
The whole left end of this house had been consumed by fire to the point to where there was not a single wall or stud left standing. It was just the foundation and the ashes there.
By the time firefighters had put the blaze out, there was pretty much nothing left.
Except 2 bodies.
There was a large dog that was a family pet, recovered from the master bedroom area, and that was among the ashes.
Tragically, Julie is pulled from the ashes too.
Julie was a very kind, sweet, gentle person. She was just a great lady that didn't deserve this. I called Keith on my cell phone to tell him that the house had burnt and Julie was dead.
It's just over 3 hours drive from Jeffersonville to Paducah.
When he pulled up to the scene of the fire in his truck, I got out of my cruiser and walked up to him, gave him a hug and told him I was sorry.
Keith! Of course, my husband and I are both losing it at that point. It was an emotional state I can't describe.
You know, you're always welcome to stay with us.
We'd just been with her. It was not real. It just was not real.
Keith has been away, and now he arrives at this horrific scene where his wife and his dog are dead, his house is destroyed. Everything that he has had for all of these years is now gone. I do think that he would be worrying what people would think about the fact that he was away when this happened.
I can imagine him feeling, for whatever love he still had in his heart for Julie, a sense of loss and sadness about that, but also because he was cheating and he clearly has wanted to disengage from the marriage for a long time. I can imagine him feeling a sense of maybe some freedom and relief out of it.
Fire marshals don't see any telltale signs of arson.
It was assumed that this was a heating unit fire, an accidental fire.
Except the autopsy on Julie's body reveals Julie did not die of smoke inhalation.
That was the pinnacle part of the investigation that completely changed everything. This was a homicide.
Julie Griffith and her dog Cleo appear to have died in a tragic house fire, until the autopsy on Julie's body reveals that she did not die of smoke inhalation.
It was determined that Julie had been shot 3 times in the torso.
Bullets found at the scene corroborate the autopsy's findings. Now police consider a new theory, that a prowler shot Julie in a break-in gone wrong.
Detectives were assigned to canvass the area, go door to door, trying to look for anyone that may have seen or heard anything.
The sheriff's office knocked on every door in the neighborhood to see if they could uncover any video recordings when this event happened that night.
The investigation takes another turn as deputies sift through what's left of the garage.
They collected 20 boxes of .45 caliber ammunition from the Griffiths garage. It was the same caliber that was used to shoot Julie Griffith.
Police find several guns, but none that fire .45 caliber ammunition.
It just didn't make sense that he had so many guns, so much ammunition, but the one gun that would be missing would be the same type of caliber that Julie was shot with.
So what's the story with the ammunition? We didn't find a .45 caliber gun.
I heard there was going to be ammunition restrictions.
He was in fear that the government may institute some type of an ammunition control.
What time did you say you checked into your hotel last night?
9 p.m. Indiana time.
And did you go out at any time?
At 11 o'clock, I went for a soda.
I couldn't have been gone 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then I left again about 4 o'clock and just went and got a donut and a Coke.
You couldn't sleep? Something bothering you?
Not at all.
Now, one other thing. Can we see your phone?
Sure.
And when they turned it on, the first thing that popped up was a text from Delilah.
It just simply asked the question, did you make it home okay? After Keith had not responded, Delilah responded back, you're not answering, not good.
Who's Delilah?
A work friend. A buddy.
Do you delete text messages?
I do delete them. I just don't keep them. I mean, I don't keep any of them.
It was a little peculiar that that would be the first text message he would have ever gotten from her, and felt that there should have been a longer history of text threads.
Your wife Julie's messages go back a ways. Didn't want to save space there.
I mean, I'll keep hers on there till it gets, and I keep her generally because she's sending me pictures of the grandkids.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. You're free to go.
Over the next few days, police begin checking Keith's story, starting with Delilah Culver.
One possibility that was concerning initially was, did she know about this murder? Was she involved in this murder?
Why am I here?
What's your relationship to Keith Griffith?
Well, I guess you could say we're dating.
Did you ever meet his wife, Julie?
No, you mean his ex-wife.
No, I mean his wife. The one who just died in a fire in their home.
She was in shock.
No, wait a minute. You're talking about Keith Griffith?
Mm-hmm. She was emotionally devastated when she found out that he was married.
Delilah has to be in shock right now because whatever you'd imagine is going on in your relationship is not typically something as serious and potentially dangerous as this. And so if I'm Delilah, I'm rethinking our entire relationship and wondering what I might have missed, what he might have lied about. And I also am questioning myself, wondering if I was in denial, if I should have known.
I don't think that Keith is probably that worried about the police finding out about the affair. I think he probably feels that whether or not he was having an affair with Delilah doesn't really prove or disprove anything about whether he was or wasn't the murderer.
Police learn that Delilah did not leave Indiana that night. so she's dropped as a person of interest. But they don't stop their investigation of Keith.
The detectives worked on getting a warrant to search his vehicle. One of the things found in his vehicle was he had a new insurance policy. That was really a matter of days old. And it was an insurance policy on Julie Griffith's life.
There's also an older policy on her life.
It was going to expire, but at the time, both policies was in place. You've got the insurance policies that are overlapping, both that would pay out a significant amount of money, not to mention the insurance on the home. Then you've got Delilah being a whole nother motive of being able to essentially start a new life in Indiana and have the financial backing to springboard that new life as a result of your insurance payouts.
Keith Griffith may have motive.
Yeah, I had a reservation. Keith Griffith.
But he also has an alibi.
Oh, look at that. 901. Thanks.
Until the hotel's security footage points to a much more complicated story.
You can clearly see Keith leaving the inn door. He's wearing a denim shirt that had his company logo. And then he returns 6.5 hours later, approximately, wearing a different outfit.
The convenience store has no record of anyone purchasing Keith's brand of soda that night. And the donut shop wasn't even open at the time he said he was there.
He stated where he was, but when law enforcement began to look into his alibi, they knew he was lying. We could prove he wasn't where he said he was, but we couldn't place him in Paducah.
Until they re-examine home security footage provided by neighbors. Police identify what looks to be Keith's vehicle 1 mile from his house, just before it burned to the ground.
He showed up in the area about 15 minutes before we thought the fire started, so the time frame fit perfectly.
Keith Griffith is charged with Julie's murder, plus arson, tampering with evidence, and animal cruelty.
I didn't do it!
The spouse is always the person that they suspect first. And I had to take it as that no, he did not do it.
I swear I'm innocent.
But they have something that makes them think that they do.
But when Keith stands trial a few months later,
Circuit Court in session, the Honorable Judge Hancock back presiding.
Shocking secrets are revealed about his life that might just let Keith off the hook.
There was no smoking gun. There was no DNA.
The devil is after everybody. He never lets up.
Keith Griffith stands accused of killing his wife, Julie, their dog, Cleo, and of burning down the family home. He proclaims his innocence, even though police and prosecutors have shown his alibi is a lie.
Be seated, please.
When Keith stands trial 1 year later,
Did you lie to the police? I did.
he comes up with a whole new, sordid alibi.
Nobody knew what I was doing out on the road but me. And I didn't want anybody to know.
The reason you didn't see him go to this convenience store or to this donut shop is because he was out with prostitutes.
I was embarrassed and ashamed of what I was doing the night my wife died. Just trying to have a friend with benefits on the road.
We did a forensic examination of his computer, and we started seeing a life that involved adult dating sites, escorts, pornography. We learned that he not only had a girlfriend as another woman, but even a day or two before the fire, he was actually with an escort at another hotel. It was the facade of a perfect marriage. That marriage on the outside that looked perfect, but inside it was broken. Keith's defense was that he made mistakes. He had a life that he was embarrassed of on the road that dealt with other women and sex, but he wasn't a killer.
I'm still embarrassed and ashamed of all of it. Did you kill your wife? No, sir, I did not. I loved my wife.
Jury deliberations take just 5 hours.
8 jurists voted for conviction and 4 voted for acquittal. Because this was a capital case, the jury had to decide unanimously. And because they couldn't decide that, they declared a mistrial. They have to start over.
Except, in the end, they don't.
If there was one person, just one person that I wanted dead, it would be him.
A jailhouse informant comes forward to police to say he's got valuable information.
Keith Griffith had solicited that inmate to shoot one of the lead detectives on the case.
This is too good. You serious? Griffith told you to kill me and make it look like a home invasion?
He had been attempting to plan a hit to be placed on myself.
I mean, that is the craziest thing I ever heard of.
Okay. Here's what we're gonna do.
To verify the informant's story, police ask him to get it on tape.
He agreed to wear a wire.
I'm serious, man. If I can get rid of Matt Carter, I'm scot-free. And you will be a very rich man.
You know, they discussed in detail what he wanted done.
When we learned that Keith Griffith was actively trying to kill the lead detective, I realized that he is far more dangerous than I ever believed before.
Confronted with this new hard evidence against him, Keith makes a deal.
Keith Griffith agreed to plead guilty to charges of murder, first-degree arson, animal cruelty, tampering with physical evidence, and there was an added charge of solicitation to second-degree assault.
Police and prosecutors finally have a clear picture of what happened on the night of January 16th, 2014. After years of racking up debts on escorts and gifts for Delilah, Keith was desperate. Killing Julie would wipe the slate clean.
He would just get rid of Julie and get with Delilah, and then everything would be good.
So he sets up his alibi.
I know one.
Then drives back to Paducah.
He arrives at the house. He gets out of his vehicle. He walks in the front door. He opens the bedroom door. Julie's in bed. He shoots her 3 times in the chest.
Cleo. Hey, sweetie, come here.
He lights the house on fire, and he gets in his vehicle, and he drives right back to the hotel.
And waits for news.
Chuck.
Keith. It's a real kick in the teeth.
Best that I can recall, he said this is a kick in the teeth, and I didn't see the emotion that I thought I should see from a husband that just lost his wife. The devil is after everybody. He never lets up.
Here we're looking at a guy who was in a long-term marriage, raised children, had grandkids, held down a job, and seems to be an upstanding citizen. And yet, in the second half of his life, there's murder. And what that says to me is that probably all of this sociopathic behavior has been going on for years and years and years, and yet he was covering it up. He was getting away with it.
If you look at all of the steps, how much thinking through of this Keith must have done. His brain was working just fine. and he went right ahead and did it anyway so that he could get rid of his wife and have money and a chance to go on and have another life and relationship with another woman. The only thing more evil than that you can really think of is if he had done it just for the sheer pleasure of watching Julie suffer.
In January 2016, Keith is sentenced to 30 years in jail with no possibility of appeal.
He'll die in prison, and he deserves to die in prison, and he's going to die in prison without any pride or dignity.
It was a big shock. It was beyond the fact that I was betrayed and lied to, openly lied to. I don't know how to describe that feeling, but a little bit scary.
We thought we knew Keith and Julie. We thought we knew their relationship. We thought they were a happily married couple after 36 years. I don't think Julie ever really knew who she was married to because none of us knew.
He killed his wife. He killed my friend. He killed a great lady from our Sunday school class. And I miss her. We all miss her.
The decade of the 1970s represented a profound and unique chapter in the history of global exploration and travel. It was an era distinctly suspended between the rapid, encroaching modernization of the industrialized world and the enduring, ancient rhythms of the remote, less accessible corners of the earth. During this period, the world was still vast, mysterious, and largely untethered by the invisible nets of instant digital communication or satellite tracking. A traveler venturing into the far reaches of the globe was genuinely stepping off the map, severing ties with the familiar and embracing a profound, uncompromising isolation. In the sprawling, seemingly infinite expanse of the South Pacific Ocean, there existed islands that remained largely untouched by the heavy, transformative hand of commercial mass tourism. These were places where the raw, imposing geography itself dictated the absolute rules of human existence, demanding respect and punishing carelessness with severe consequences. Tutuila, the primary and most significant island of the American Samoa archipelago, stood as a prime example of such a place. To the distant, outside world, to those who only experienced these exotic locales through the glossy, highly saturated pages of monthly travel magazines or the rare, grainy television documentaries of the era, Tutuila was presented as a pristine, idyllic paradise. It was consistently depicted as a tranquil sanctuary, defined by endless, vibrant coral reefs teeming with exotic aquatic life, where the warm, azure waters of the Pacific gently lapped against shores of impossibly white sand. It was marketed and sold to the imagination as a quiet haven, a necessary escape from the suffocating, mechanical noise and the concrete confines of the modern city. But nature, particularly in its truest, most untamed form, is rarely as simple or as benign as a printed postcard. The fundamental reality of Tutuila was far more complex and imposing, defined by a profound duality that offered unparalleled, breathtaking beauty on its coastal fringes, but harbored an impenetrable, deeply mysterious, and almost hostile wilderness at its very core. Beyond the protective, calming barrier of the coral reefs, the geology of the island rose abruptly and violently from the ocean floor. It formed a landscape that was as visually majestic as it was physically intimidating. The interior heart of Tutuila was not a gentle, curated tropical garden designed for leisurely strolls. Rather, it was a deep, chaotic, and verdant labyrinth. It was a suffocating, incredibly dense rainforest where the ancient, towering canopy grew so thick and tangled that the intense equatorial sunlight struggling to pierce through was ultimately reduced to fragmented, spectral beams resting on the forest floor. The air trapped beneath these massive, ancient trees was perpetually heavy, completely saturated with thick humidity and the constant, earthy scent of damp soil, rapidly decaying foliage, and the raw, untrammeled essence of a thriving tropical ecosystem. This massive, green maze was bordered abruptly by formidable, sheer volcanic cliffs that plunged mercilessly and vertically into the turbulent, eternally churning waters of the Pacific Ocean far below. These towering precipices were not merely interesting geological formations to be admired from afar. They were absolute, unforgiving boundaries carved by millennia of elemental violence. The sound of the relentless ocean waves crashing violently against these jagged, unforgiving walls of dark stone was a constant, thunderous heartbeat that echoed through the lower canopy. It served as a relentless, echoing reminder of the immense, indifferent, and ultimately destructive power of the natural world. It was a landscape that demanded absolute, unwavering respect. A treacherous environment where a single moment of distraction or a single misjudged step could instantly mean the difference between experiencing profound awe and facing sudden, terrifying obliteration. Into this landscape of breathtaking extremes and hidden perils came a solitary figure, a Western landscape photographer who was inexorably drawn by the undeniable, pulling magnetism of the unknown. He was a man fundamentally defined by his relentless pursuit of the unseen, an adventurer and an artist who actively and deliberately sought out the remaining blank spaces on the map. He yearned for the territories that had yet to be fully tamed, categorized, or documented by the invasive lens of modern man. In the context of the 1970s, the art and profession of landscape photography was an incredibly demanding discipline, requiring immense physical stamina and deep mental fortitude. It was an entirely analog world, separated by decades from the instant gratification, easy manipulation, and lightweight convenience of modern digital imaging technology. It required immense patience, physical endurance, and an almost obsessive, unwavering dedication to the intricate mechanics of the craft. This particular photographer did not traverse the globe carrying lightweight, automated, plastic equipment. His chosen tools were mechanical, heavy, incredibly precise, and completely unforgiving of user error. He carried the significant physical weight of a professional, all-metal Leica camera, a true marvel of mid-century engineering that required an intimate, intuitive understanding of ambient light, manual exposure settings, and precise optical composition. Along with the heavy, solid metal body of the Leica camera itself, he bore the burden of a thick canvas bag heavily laden with delicate, irreplaceable rolls of unexposed photographic film, fragile and heavy glass lenses of varying focal lengths, and the myriad of small, essential accessories necessary to capture and preserve the profound beauty of a wild, untamed world. For this man, the act of photography was not a casual, passing hobby, nor was it merely a profession. It was a profound internal compulsion, an absolute necessity to distill the overwhelming, chaotic grandeur of the natural world into a single, permanent, and perfectly composed two-dimensional frame. He was endlessly searching for that elusive, singular image, the defining photograph of a lifetime that would justify his arduous travels, cement his professional legacy, and validate his relentless journeying away from the comforts of home. He was searching for a pure visual truth that he believed could only be found by deliberately stepping far away from the familiar, heavily trodden paths and venturing deeply into the raw, unvarnished, and potentially dangerous heart of nature. He specifically sought to capture the true, underlying essence of Tutuila. He had no interest in the sanitized, commercially palatable version of the island presented to the wealthy tourists lounging on the southern beaches. He wanted to document the wild, breathing, and dangerous reality of the environment. He aimed to photograph the violent, eternal collision between the ancient, immovable volcanic rock and the endless, kinetic energy of the ocean. He wanted to explore the intricate, shadowy, and claustrophobic depths of the dense rainforest, and he was particularly drawn to the silent, imposing majesty of the northern cliffs. These remote northern reaches of the island were emphatically not places designed for the faint of heart or the inexperienced traveler. They were geographically remote, highly treacherous, severely lacking in any established trails, and completely steeped in a thick, palpable sense of isolation that could easily overwhelm an unprepared mind. It is a tragic paradox of this kind of artistic exploration that the very elements making a landscape so visually compelling and dramatically beautiful are exactly the same elements that make it so profoundly physically dangerous. The singular, focused pursuit of the perfect image is a pursuit that very often, and sometimes fatally, blinds the artist to the immediate, practical, and lethal perils of their immediate physical surroundings. When the photographer's eye is firmly pressed against the small glass viewfinder of the camera, the entire vastness of the world is suddenly reduced and confined to a carefully, meticulously framed rectangular composition. The peripheral vision narrows dramatically and practically ceases to exist. The vital, subconscious awareness of the crumbling, unstable edge of a sheer cliff, or the slippery, treacherous, moss-covered surface of the uneven stone resting beneath one's leather boots gradually fades away. This crucial spatial awareness is entirely replaced by a hyper-focused attention on the delicate interplay of light and shadow, the structural geometry of the landscape, and the horizon. Tense anticipation of the exact, decisive fraction of a second when the mechanical shutter must be released. It is a psychological state of deep, vulnerable immersion. The photographer effectively becomes a silent, stationary observer, entirely consumed by the cognitive act of seeing and composing, often completely forgetting that they are also a fragile, biological, physical presence standing within an indifferent environment that feels absolutely no empathy and makes zero allowances for human physical frailty or momentary distraction. On a particular morning heavily draped in a thick, clinging, and unusually cold mist, this dedicated photographer set out from the relative safety, warmth, and civilized comfort of his coastal accommodation. The dense fog heavily obscured the towering volcanic peaks and softened the harsh, jagged outlines of the dense jungle canopy, adding an ethereal, almost spectral and ghostly quality to the entire island landscape. It was precisely the kind of moody, atmospheric weather condition that dedicated landscape photographers actively covet and seek out. It was a condition that transforms the mundane scenery into something visually extraordinary, offering the tantalizing promise of capturing images deeply imbued with profound mystery, heavy atmosphere, and emotional weight. He carried his heavy mechanical equipment, deliberately stepping away from the paved roads, the safe coastal settlements, and the comforting presence of other human beings. He moved steadily and purposefully toward the rugged, unforgiving, and deeply isolated northern sector of the island. He was knowingly walking into a specific geographical region that the indigenous inhabitants of the island regarded with a deep, complex, and ancient mixture of profound reverence and genuine unease. It was an area intricately woven with generations of ancient cultural narratives, strict unspoken boundaries, and a lingering sense of the supernatural. But to the photographer, armed solely with his mechanical eye, his scientific understanding of optics, and his singular artistic focus, it was not a realm of spirits or danger. It was simply a magnificent, expansive canvas, a wild, untouched frontier waiting patiently to be captured, framed, and immortalized forever on a delicate, chemically treated strip of celluloid film. He walked forward and eventually vanished completely into the thick, humid, green embrace of the tropical labyrinth. The dense, wet foliage seamlessly closed behind him, forming a heavy, impenetrable curtain of solid green that instantly swallowed the sound of his heavy footsteps and muffled the metallic clinking of his camera gear. He effectively became a ghost wandering in a world that felt as though it predated human memory and civilization. The island, with its massive ancient trees, its hidden, incredibly treacherous ravines, and its silent, ever-watching shadows, simply absorbed his physical presence entirely. He had journeyed thousands of miles across the vast ocean, driven entirely by a profound, insatiable artistic hunger to find the ultimate image, to capture the raw, untamed spirit of the natural world. He went into the jungle looking for unparalleled beauty, for a profound, quiet connection with the earth, and for an artistic legacy written entirely in the language of captured light and shadow. But the island of Tutuila, resting in its vast, indifferent, and ancient majesty, harbored entirely different plans for the solitary traveler. The ambitious photographic expedition that began as a passionate quest for artistic immortality would slowly, silently, and inevitably spiral into a profound, chilling tragedy. The beautiful, harsh landscape that he so desperately sought to conquer and understand with his mechanical lens would instead become the final, silent, and unyielding witness to his complete demise. Days would pass in agonizing slowness without any sign of his return. The initial, mild concern generated by his absence among the hotel staff would slowly, inevitably harden into a cold, terrifying, and urgent dread. Out in the wild, the morning mist would eventually clear. The intense equatorial sun would beat down mercilessly on the dense green canopy, and the island would simply continue its ancient, rhythmic, biological existence, completely and utterly unaffected by the sudden absence of one solitary, ambitious man. The massive, frantic search operation that would inevitably follow his disappearance would become a desperate, agonizing, and physically exhausting effort, pitting frail human determination against a harsh environment that actively, aggressively resisted any form of human intrusion or thorough investigation. And when the dense, unforgiving jungle finally yielded its terrible, long-held secret, many weeks after the photographer had first walked confidently into the morning mist, the ultimate discovery would instantly and violently shatter any comforting illusion of a peaceful, accidental departure. The grim truth patiently waiting at the bottom of a deep, highly secluded, and suffocatingly narrow rock ravine was not the tranquil, melancholic conclusion of a life spent in quiet communion with nature. It was, instead, a haunting, deeply disturbing, and horrifyingly violent tableau that completely defied any simple or easy explanation. The physical remains that were eventually, painstakingly recovered from the depths of the earth, heavily broken and severely diminished by the relentless, destructive forces of the tropical environment and the cruel passage of time, spoke silently but clearly of a narrative far darker, far more complex, and infinitely more sinister than a simple, unfortunate misstep on a precarious cliff edge. The photographer had indeed found a profound and terrifying reality deeply hidden within the dark heart of the island. It was a brutal reality that entirely transcended the safe bounds of his artistic vision and plunged directly into the darkest, most unfathomable, and violent depths of the human experience. His ambitious journey into the wild had culminated not in the triumphant creation of a photographic masterpiece, but rather in a bloody, baffling mystery that would endure and fester for decades. It became a chilling, unanswered echo of violence trapped forever within the sheer, damp stone walls of a deep tropical abyss, leaving behind a legacy not of light, but of impenetrable, suffocating darkness. To truly comprehend the depth of the tragedy that unfolded on the island of Tutuila, one must first attempt to construct a psychological and physical profile of the man who walked willingly into its treacherous embrace. In the annals of missing persons cases, the victim is often a creature of routine, suddenly and violently ripped from the predictable fabric of their daily existence. However, this particular case presents a profoundly different narrative archetype. The man at the center of this enduring mystery was a Western landscape photographer, an individual whose entire worldview was fundamentally predicated on the deliberate rejection of routine and the active, relentless pursuit of the extraordinary. He was an adventurer in the truest, most visceral sense of the word, a restless spirit operating in the 1970s. An era immediately preceding the homogenizing wave of mass global tourism and the pervasive safety nets of modern satellite communication. For this man, the heavily populated, easily accessible destinations that adorn the glossy pages of standard travel brochures held absolutely zero appeal. He was entirely driven by an insatiable, consuming desire to document the untouched, the isolated, and the geographically extreme. He sought out the blank spaces on the map, those rare and formidable pockets of the earth that actively resisted human habitation and commercial exploitation. His chosen medium, landscape photography, was not merely a profession or a passing creative hobby. It was a grueling, physically demanding lifestyle that required immense stamina, a high tolerance for profound isolation, and an unwavering, almost obsessive dedication to the mechanical and chemical processes of analog image capture. He was a man defined by the heavy, precision-engineered tools of his trade. He did not travel lightly or casually. His constant companion was a fully manual, solid brass and glass Leica camera, a masterpiece of mid-century optical engineering that demanded absolute expertise from its user. In a time long before the instant gratification and infinite storage capacity of digital photography, Every single press of the mechanical shutter was a calculated, irreversible commitment. A standard roll of photographic film offered only 36 precious exposures, meaning that every composition had to be meticulously planned, the ambient light rigorously measured, and the physical environment deeply understood before the image could be permanently burned onto the sensitive celluloid. This rigorous, unforgiving process dictated his movement and his mindset. He was methodical, patient, and deeply attuned to the subtle, shifting nuances of his physical surroundings. Yet, it is exactly this intense, singular focus on the visual potential of a landscape that often renders such artists vulnerable to its hidden, physical dangers. The heavy canvas bag he carried, heavily laden with expensive, fragile lenses, delicate light meters, and irreplaceable rolls of film, was not just a burden of equipment. It was the physical manifestation of his artistic ambition, a weight he willingly bore into the most unforgiving environments on earth. He was a man who believed that profound visual beauty could only be extracted through immense physical effort and calculated risk, a philosophy that would ultimately lead him to the jagged, mist-shrouded edge of the world. The specific destination that had drawn him across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean was the northern coastline of Tutuila, a geographical region that stood in stark, violent contrast to the calm, welcoming southern beaches. While the southern portion of the island offered safe anchorages and the comforting, predictable rhythms of human settlement, the Northern Territory was a brutal, chaotic masterpiece of raw geological violence. It was characterized by colossal, sheer volcanic cliffs that rose vertically and mercilessly from the deep, turbulent ocean, their dark, jagged faces constantly battered by the relentless, immense power of the Pacific swells. Above these terrifying precipices lay a suffocating, dense, and practically impenetrable tropical rainforest. There were no marked trails here, no scenic overlooks, and no safety barriers. It was a chaotic, ancient wilderness where the heavy, humid air was perpetually thick with the smell of decaying vegetation and the deafening, echoing roar of the ocean crashing against a stone far below. This was a landscape that did not merely exist. It actively intimidated, demanding profound respect and punishing the slightest miscalculation with severe, often fatal, consequences. However, the peril of the northern cliffs was not entirely limited to their treacherous physical geography. For the indigenous Samoan population, this rugged, isolated territory held a significance that went far beyond its dangerous topography. It was deeply woven into the complex, ancient fabric of their cultural and spiritual beliefs. The locals spoke of the northern reaches in hushed, reverent tones, actively avoiding the area and explicitly warning outsiders to do the same. In their ancestral mythology, this dense, unforgiving jungle and the precipitous drops were the undisputed domain of the Aidu, the ancient, powerful spirits of the land, and the ancestors. It was considered a profoundly sacred and highly volatile space, a territory where the thin veil separating the physical world of the living from the ethereal realm of the spirits was believed to be perilously thin. To enter this domain without proper reverence, deep ancestral connection, or specific, necessary purpose was considered a dangerous transgression, a foolish invitation for profound misfortune. The warnings provided to the photographer by the local residents were not based on a simple fear of heights or getting lost. They were urgent, sincere cautions rooted in a deep, generational understanding of a landscape that they believed was fiercely guarded by unseen, potent forces. But to a Western mind trained in rationalism, science, and the tangible mechanics of optical physics, such deeply held spiritual beliefs were likely viewed merely as colorful local folklore, an interesting cultural backdrop rather than a literal, mortal threat to his physical safety. The tragic intersection of his burning artistic ambition and the unforgiving reality of the island culminated on a morning that seemed ominously tailored for his specific purpose. The weather was not clear and inviting, but rather heavily obscured by a thick, clinging, and unusually cold oceanic mist that rolled forcefully in from the sea, completely swallowing the towering peaks and drowning the dense jungle canopy in an impenetrable sea of gray. For the average traveler, such poor visibility would dictate a day spent safely indoors. But for a dedicated landscape photographer, this heavy fog was an absolute gift, a rare, atmospheric condition that possessed the power to transform the harsh, jagged reality of the cliffs into a scene of profound, ethereal mystery. The mist diffused the harsh tropical light, saturated the deep greens of the vegetation, and promised the kind of haunting, emotionally resonant images that build a professional legacy. Driven by the tantalizing prospect of capturing this fleeting, spectral beauty, he prepared for his expedition with his usual, meticulous care. He checked the mechanical functions of his Leica, loaded a fresh roll of film, and carefully packed his heavy canvas bag. His departure from the small, quiet hotel was a solitary, unremarkable event occurring in the muted, still hours before the rest of the world had fully awakened. He walked out into the damp, heavy air, his heavy leather boots leaving temporary impressions in the wet earth, the metallic strap of his camera resting familiarly against his neck. The staff at the hotel, accustomed to the eccentric, independent schedules of adventurous foreigners, took little notice of his early exit. There was no grand farewell, no detailed itinerary left behind, simply the quiet departure of a man heading out to do the work that defined his existence. He walked steadily away from the relative safety of the settlement, deliberately crossing the invisible boundary that separated the tamed, predictable world of human habitation from the wild, ancient, and deeply unforgiving realm of the northern cliffs. He walked directly into the thick, swirling fog, ascending towards the territory that the locals explicitly feared. Armed with nothing but his camera and his unwavering belief in his own physical and professional invulnerability. As the dense, wet jungle foliage closed seamlessly behind him, swallowing his silhouette and muffling the sound of his footsteps, he was completely and utterly alone, entirely at the mercy of an environment that felt absolutely no empathy for his artistic pursuit. The true, horrifying weight of his disappearance did not register immediately. The initial hours following his departure were marked by the mundane, uninterrupted routine of the island. When the evening arrived and the heavy tropical darkness enveloped Tutuila, his absence was noted by the hotel staff, but it was easily rationalized. It was not entirely uncommon for ambitious photographers to lose track of time, to become so deeply engrossed in capturing the fading twilight or navigating the difficult terrain that they were forced to wait for the morning light to safely return. The initial feeling was not panic, but rather a mild, lingering annoyance mixed with a faint, underlying unease. However, as the long, dark night slowly gave way to a second morning, and his room remained completely undisturbed, the mild concern began to rapidly curdle into genuine, rising alarm. The sheer, unforgiving nature of the Northern Territory meant that a night spent out in the open without proper shelter or preparation was a profoundly dangerous proposition. By the time the sun set on the second day without any sign or word from the missing man, the quiet unease had fully transformed into a cold, urgent dread. The authorities were finally notified, and the slow, heavy machinery of an official missing persons investigation was reluctantly put into motion. By the third consecutive day of his unexplained absence, the grim reality of the situation had settled heavily over the local community and the authorities. A massive, coordinated search operation was officially established, drawing together local law enforcement, skilled indigenous trackers who intimately knew the treacherous terrain, and volunteers from the surrounding villages. They formed long, methodical lines, attempting to push their way through the dense, suffocating undergrowth, calling his name into the vast, indifferent expanse of the jungle. They carefully combed the precarious, crumbling edges of the northern cliffs, peering anxiously down into the turbulent, churning water and the jagged rocks below, desperately searching for any sign of broken vegetation, a dropped piece of equipment, or a piece of torn clothing. But the search effort quickly revealed the profound, terrifying power of the Samoan wilderness. The landscape was incredibly vast, infinitely complex, and actively hostile to their presence. The heavy, persistent rains washed away footprints almost as quickly as they were made. The dense, layered canopy completely blocked any attempt at aerial observation. The deafening, constant roar of the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs effectively drowned out their voices, making long-distance communication virtually impossible. Despite the sheer number of people involved and the desperate, exhausting physical effort expended over many agonizing days, the island yielded absolutely nothing. The dense, ancient jungle seemed to have simply opened up and swallowed the photographer whole, erasing every single trace of his existence as efficiently and indifferently as the ocean tide erases footprints on the sand. The massive search operation, initially fueled by a desperate hope for a successful rescue, gradually, painfully transitioned into a grim, silent, and physically exhausting recovery mission. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the northern cliffs, the very place the locals called the Land of the Spirits, seemed to mock their frantic, futile efforts. The profound silence of the missing man, contrasted against the overwhelming, chaotic noise of the natural environment, created a deeply unsettling psychological weight for everyone involved. He had ventured into the wild to capture its essence, but instead, the wild had completely captured him, leaving behind only a profound, terrifying void and a mystery that would soon take an incredibly dark and completely unexpected turn. The jungle held its terrible secret tightly, demanding patience and exacting a heavy psychological toll on those who dared to look for the truth hidden within its deep, green shadows. As the first week of the massive search operation bled agonizingly into the second, and then slowly and painfully into the third, the frantic, high-energy momentum that had initially characterized the desperate rescue mission began to inevitably wane. It was replaced by a heavy, suffocating blanket of collective exhaustion, deep frustration, and an unspoken, growing despair. The massive, highly coordinated grid searches that had mobilized hundreds of dedicated local volunteers, highly skilled indigenous trackers, and numerous law enforcement personnel gradually dwindled in both size and scope. This reduction was a necessary, unavoidable concession to the brutal, unforgiving physical reality of the Tutuila terrain and the absolute, finite limits of human physical endurance. The dense, ancient rainforest of the Northern Territory had definitively proven itself to be a deeply hostile and completely uncompromising adversary, actively and aggressively resisting every single human attempt to penetrate its dark, shadowed depths. The persistent, incredibly heavy equatorial rains had relentlessly washed away any subtle tracks, broken branches, or minor disturbances in the soil, effectively erasing the physical, terrestrial narrative of the photographer's final movements. Furthermore, the towering, multi-layered jungle canopy above continued to completely block any meaningful aerial reconnaissance from helicopters, while the chaotic, deeply fractured volcanic geology of the land rendered ground movement perilously slow, physically exhausting, and frequently dangerous for the searches themselves. Hope, which had burned so fiercely and brightly in the initial days following his unexplained disappearance, was slowly, methodically, and ruthlessly extinguished by the sheer, vast indifference of the natural landscape. The official classification of the intense operation silently but definitively shifted from a desperate, race-against-time rescue mission to a grim, methodical, and deeply somber recovery effort. The authorities and the exhausted local community were no longer actively searching for a lost, injured traveler desperately clinging to survival in the wild. They were now reluctantly resigned to the tragic task of locating a deceased body. They sought only to provide a final, definitive resolution to the enduring, painful mystery and to eventually return the physical remains to his distant, grieving family. This agonizing, drawn-out transition from desperate hope to a grim, cold certainty cast a dark, heavy psychological pall over the remaining, dedicated search teams, fundamentally transforming their daily, grueling treks into the unforgiving jungle into a solemn, silent death march through an environment that felt increasingly oppressive, intimately dangerous, and deeply sinister. The ultimate, horrifying breakthrough in the prolonged case did not eventually arrive from a brilliant deductive insight, a discarded piece of photographic equipment, or a meticulously executed grid search pattern, but rather from the most primitive, undeniable, and deeply visceral of all human biological senses, It arrived silently, carried on the heavy, stagnant, and intensely humid currents of air that circulated lazily beneath the dense, suffocating tropical canopy. Weeks after the photographer had first vanished completely into the morning mist, a small, thoroughly exhausted team of indigenous trackers, carefully navigating a particularly treacherous, deeply fractured, and rarely visited section of the high northern plateau, suddenly stopped dead in their tracks. The profound, suffocating, and ever-present scent of the decaying jungle foliage, a familiar, thick earthy aroma composed of damp volcanic soil, rotting ancient wood, and blooming tropical orchids, was suddenly and violently pierced by a distinctly different, highly localized, and profoundly unsettling odor. It was the unmistakable, sickly sweet, and deeply cloying stench of advanced human decomposition. This was emphatically not the natural, cyclical smell of the wilderness. It was the heavy, visceral, and horrifying scent of human death, an organic, chemical marker that abruptly and violently shattered the surrounding illusion of the pristine, untouched natural environment. The seasoned trackers, men who were intimately familiar with the subtle, hidden languages and the natural cycles of the wild, recognized it instantly and with a deep, chilling certainty. The sudden discovery of this macabre, invisible scent profoundly and permanently altered the psychological atmosphere of the search operation. The previous, heavy silence of the jungle, once merely oppressive and physically draining, suddenly felt immensely heavy with a dark, terrifying, and morbid anticipation. The searchers immediately abandoned their wide, sweeping geographical patterns and began to slowly, meticulously follow the invisible, horrifying trail suspended in the thick air. Their physical senses completely heightened, their movements incredibly careful and deliberate, mentally and emotionally bracing themselves for the grim, inevitable reality they knew was patiently waiting for them at the unseen source. Tracking that sickening scent through the chaotic, wildly overgrown, and intensely hostile terrain was an arduous, highly disturbing, and physically perilous process that required them to slowly navigate through dense, razor-sharp underbrush and carefully climb over deeply fractured, highly unstable volcanic rock formations. The invisible, olfactory trail led them steadily and relentlessly away from any semblance of a navigable, recognized path, pulling them deeper and deeper into a particularly dark, ancient, and undisturbed section of the forest where the vegetation seemed to grow to monstrous, prehistoric proportions. Eventually, after hours of grueling, silent tracking, the sickening odor led the exhausted team directly to the precarious, crumbling edge of an incredibly deep, extremely narrow, and highly secluded geological crevasse. It was a hidden, jagged wound in the earth that was almost entirely concealed from above by a massive, overarching canopy of giant, ancient tree ferns. The massive fronds of these ancient plants, some stretching several meters across the gap, acted as a dense, living, biological roof, completely blocking out the bright equatorial sunlight and plunging the deep, narrow ravine below into a permanent state of damp, terrifying twilight. The ravine itself was a horrifying, sheer vertical drop, a narrow, jagged fissure in the solid, dark volcanic rock that appeared to have been violently torn open by some ancient, catastrophic seismic event millennia ago. The sheer, towering stone walls were incredibly slick, thickly coated with black moss and constant, trickling, subterranean moisture, making any spontaneous attempt at a physical descent an incredibly dangerous, almost suicidal proposition. The searchers stood silently at the dangerous precipice, peering cautiously down through the small gaps in the giant ferns into the suffocating, dark, and seemingly bottomless abyss. The stench of death was now overwhelmingly strong, billowing up from the hidden depths below like a dark, invisible, and suffocating cloud. They had finally, undeniably found the exact location, but the immense physical challenge of safely reaching the bottom of the treacherous crevasse presented a formidable, terrifying new obstacle that required specialized tactical rope equipment, significant manpower, and immense physical courage from the recovery team. The subsequent, highly technical recovery operation was a slow, incredibly dangerous, and deeply somber undertaking that consumed the entirety of the following day. Specially trained law enforcement personnel, heavily equipped with thick climbing ropes, heavy steel carabiners, and makeshift, rigid rescue litters. Carefully and methodically rigged a complex descent system at the highly unstable, crumbling edge of the dark ravine. Slowly, agonizingly, and with extreme caution, several officers were lowered directly into the dark, narrow fissure. Their heavy leather boots scraped loudly against the wet, moss-covered stone walls, and the ambient temperature dropped noticeably and rapidly as they descended out of the oppressive tropical heat and directly into the cold, damp, and silent shadows of the earth. The sheer, terrifying physical difficulty of the deep descent perfectly underscored the profound geographic isolation and the highly fatal nature of the hidden location. As the officers finally reached the uneven, deeply fractured rocky floor of the crevasse, the extremely limited, ghostly light filtering through the giant ferns high above revealed a scene of profound human tragedy and utter physical devastation. The harsh environment at the very bottom of the ravine was a chaotic, jumbled mass of jagged, razor-sharp volcanic boulders, thick piles of rotting vegetation, and deep, stagnant pools of dark rainwater. The air down there was incredibly heavy, completely still, and entirely saturated with the overwhelming, sickening scent of decay. A deeply visceral sensory experience that forced the entire recovery team to heavily rely on thick, chemical respirator masks simply to continue their grim, necessary work. The sheer, towering, wet walls of the ravine pressed in incredibly closely on all sides, creating a profound, terrifying sense of claustrophobia and highlighting the inescapable, absolutely fatal nature of a fall into this particular geological trap. It was a place fundamentally hidden from the eyes of the world, a dark, silent, and incredibly cold natural tomb that had perfectly, indifferently preserved the dark secret of the photographer's sudden disappearance for many agonizing weeks. And there, resting silently among the sharp, unforgiving rocks and the damp, decaying debris at the very bottom of the narrow abyss, lay the final, horrific, and undeniable answer to the mystery. The physical remains of the missing photographer were finally located, but the significant passage of time and the brutal, relentless exposure to the harsh, unforgiving tropical elements had inflicted a terrible, deeply disturbing physical toll on the body. The remains were in an extremely advanced state of biological decomposition, heavily ravaged by the intense, trapped humidity, the constant, dripping moisture, and the natural, aggressive biological processes of the deep jungle environment. It was a grim, entirely heartbreaking sight that completely and violently stripped away the romanticized, artistic illusion of the bold, adventurous explorer, leaving behind only the fragile, broken, and tragic reality of human mortality. The severe degradation of the remains made immediate, visual facial identification completely impossible, but the close physical presence of specific, highly recognizable personal items confirmed his identity beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt. Not far from the deeply compromised skeletal remains, heavily wedged tight between two jagged, unyielding boulders, the recovery team discovered his heavy canvas equipment bag and the iconic, solid brass Leica camera, the very precision instrument that had ultimately driven him to this isolated, deeply fatal location, had suffered catastrophic, irreparable physical damage. The delicate, expensive glass lenses were completely shattered into thousands of fragments, and the heavy mechanical body was heavily dented, structurally warped, and completely seized by thick rust and pervasive moisture. Most tragically for the investigation and for his artistic legacy, the highly sensitive internal film compartment had been severely, completely compromised. Whether due to the extreme physical violence of the initial fall, the intense, prolonged environmental moisture, or some other unknown, sinister factor, the crucial roll of photographic film trapped inside the camera was completely ruined. The film that might have held the final, vital visual record of his last living moments, or perhaps the breathtaking, final images he had tragically died trying to capture, was entirely destroyed. Its delicate chemical emulsion completely dissolved, taking whatever visual secrets it held permanently and forever into dark oblivion. The incredibly difficult, physically demanding, and highly dangerous process of carefully extracting the fragile, heavily decomposed remains from the bottom of the deep. Narrow ravine took several grueling hours, requiring immense physical exertion, careful coordination, and deeply respectful handling by the thoroughly exhausted recovery team. Once the tragic remains were finally brought to the surface and slowly transported back to the local medical facilities for examination, a distinct, incredibly powerful sense of bureaucratic urgency quickly and noticeably began to permeate the official handling of the tragic case. The local police department, heavily burdened by the massive, unprecedented expenditure of civic resources and desperate to alleviate the dark, unsettling, and economically damaging cloud that the prolonged mystery had cast over the island, demonstrated a strong, immediate, and overriding desire to officially close the investigation as rapidly and cleanly as possible. Faced with the obvious, terrible physical trauma of a body successfully recovered from the deep bottom of a massive, sheer vertical drop, the local authorities quickly, comfortably, and confidently formulated a definitive, highly plausible narrative. They officially and publicly labeled the deeply tragic incident as a straightforward, albeit deeply unfortunate, accidental death. The hastily prepared official police report painted a clear, logical picture of a dedicated but ultimately careless artist who, entirely consumed by his creative visual pursuit and temporarily blinded by the thick, unpredictable morning mist, had simply and tragically lost his footing on the treacherous, highly unstable edge of the cliff while attempting to compose a photograph, plummeting helplessly and fatally into the hidden ravine below. It was a clean, logical, and highly comforting explanation that perfectly fit the known, basic facts of the dangerous terrain. It provided a neat, easily digestible, and culturally acceptable resolution to the deeply distressing situation, allowing the authorities to quickly close the file, reassure the frightened local population, and rapidly attempt to return the beautiful island to its normal, peaceful, and profitable routine. However, this extremely hasty, desperately convenient conclusion, built entirely on circumstantial geographical assumptions and an overwhelming desire for rapid bureaucratic closure, completely and willfully ignored the much darker, far more sinister hidden realities that were patiently waiting to be uncovered in the morgue, setting the perfect, dramatic stage for a shocking forensic revelation that would soon tear the comforting illusion of a simple, tragic accident entirely and permanently to shreds. The official narrative of a tragic, accidental fall provided a much-needed sense of relief to the local administration and the weary inhabitants of Tutuila, offering a clean and logical conclusion to a mystery that had gripped the island for nearly a month. With the photographer's broken body recovered and his expensive, shattered equipment accounted for, the bureaucratic machinery moved with uncharacteristic speed to process the remains and close the file. However, this comfort was shallow and short-lived, existing only as long as the body remained unexamined by the cold, objective eye of forensic science. When the remains were finally transported to the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of the morgue for a mandatory post-mortem examination, the atmospheric mystery of the jungle was replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of bone and trauma. The task of the medical examiner was not merely to confirm the cause of death, but to reconstruct the final moments of a human life through the physical evidence left behind on the skeletal structure. Because the soft tissue had been so severely compromised by weeks of exposure to the intense tropical humidity and the aggressive biological activity of the ravine floor, the bones themselves became the primary witnesses to whatever violence had occurred in the shadows of the northern cliffs. What began as a routine procedure to validate a foregone conclusion of accidental trauma quickly transformed into a chilling, high-stakes investigation as the examiner began to clean and inspect the remains, discovering anomalies that simply did not align with the physics of a simple, vertical plummet onto jagged rocks. The first indication that the official story was fundamentally flawed emerged during the detailed inspection of the lower extremities and the rib cage. In a typical high-altitude fall, the skeletal system exhibits signs of blunt force trauma characterized by massive, comminuted fractures, bones shattered into multiple fragments by the sudden, overwhelming dissipation of kinetic energy upon impact. While there were indeed fractures consistent with a fall, the examiner noticed something far more specific and sinister lurking beneath the expected damage. On the surfaces of the femur and several ribs, there were distinct, localized marks that bore no resemblance to the chaotic splintering caused by a collision with stone. These were precise, linear indentations, characterized by smooth edges and a repetitive nature that suggested the deliberate application of force. Upon closer examination under high magnification, these marks were identified as mechanical hesitation cuts, tiny, sharp nicks in the bone that occur when a blade or a heavy, sharp-edged tool strikes the skeletal surface with significant velocity. These were not the random, jagged abrasions of a tumbling body. They were the clean, unmistakable signatures of a sharp-edged weapon, such as a heavy machete or a traditional island tool, striking the body multiple times. The presence of these marks on the bone indicated that the metal had sliced through the muscle and connective tissue with enough force to notch the very framework of the human frame, a level of violence that occurred before the body ever reached the bottom of the crevasse. The forensic revelation became even more disturbing as the examination shifted to the timing of these injuries and the biological response of the victim's body. In a sudden, fatal fall, the heart stops almost instantly upon the impact that shatters the skull or severs the spinal cord, leaving no time for the body to mount an inflammatory response to its injuries. The microscopic analysis of the bone tissue surrounding several of the sharp force wounds revealed evidence of vital reaction, a biological process where the body attempts to heal or respond to trauma. This discovery provided a horrifying new timeline for the photographer's final hours. It suggested with terrifying clarity that the victim had not died instantly upon his disappearance into the morning mist. Instead, the evidence pointed to a period of survival following the initial infliction of these sharp force wounds. The marks on the bone, combined with the lack of immediate, fatal blunt force trauma to the cranium, indicated that the photographer had likely been alive, though perhaps severely incapacitated, for at least 48 hours after his initial contact with his assailant. This suggested a period of prolonged suffering, a horrifying window of time where he may have been held captive, pursued through the dense undergrowth, or left to linger in agony before the final, fatal plunge into the ravine occurred. The accident was no longer a simple misstep. It was the final stage of a prolonged and brutal encounter. As the forensic report began to circulate within the higher echelons of the local police department, the previous atmosphere of bureaucratic relief was instantly replaced by a tense, vibrating silence. The investigation could no longer be dismissed as a tragic mishap of a careless tourist. It was now a homicide inquiry of the most complex and sensitive nature. The noodling of the case, as some officers privately called it, required the authorities to re-examine every piece of evidence they had previously gathered with a newfound sense of suspicion. The focus shifted from the bottom of the ravine to the treacherous plateau above it, and specifically to the motivations of anyone who might have encountered the photographer in that forbidden territory. If the sharp force trauma had occurred before the fall, it meant that the photographer had met someone in the dense, green labyrinth of the northern cliffs, someone who was armed, someone who was intimately familiar with the terrain, and someone who possessed a violent reason for wanting the outsider silenced. This realization forced the investigators to look beyond the physical evidence and into the complex, often impenetrable social and cultural dynamics of the island, seeking a motive that could drive a person to commit such a calculated and brutal act of violence against a solitary, unarmed stranger. The first major line of inquiry centered on the deeply entrenched and highly contentious issue of land ownership on Tutuila. The island operated under a complex system of communal land, where ancestral territories were fiercely guarded by various family clans and village chiefs. These boundaries were often invisible to the uninitiated, marked by ancient oral traditions and subtle geographic features rather than physical fences or signs. For a Westerner, the idea of trespassing was a legal concept, but for the indigenous population, it was a profound spiritual and social transgression. The photographer, in his relentless pursuit of the perfect, untamed landscape, had deliberately ventured into the most remote and restricted areas of the northern coast territories that were currently the subject of intense, bitter disputes between local factions. Investigators began to consider the possibility that the photographer, with his heavy camera and tripod, had been mistaken for a government surveyor or a representative of a rival clan documenting the land for a legal claim. In a culture where the land is synonymous with the identity and survival of the family, the presence of a stranger capturing images of a contested area could be perceived as a direct and existential threat. A confrontation in such an isolated location, far from the eyes of the law, could easily and rapidly escalate into a fatal encounter. With the victim's body being disposed of in the deep ravine to hide the evidence of a territorial defense gone horribly wrong. As the police delved deeper into the villages nearest to the northern cliffs, a second, more shadow-shrouded theory began to emerge from the whispered conversations and the guarded glances of the local residents. This theory moved away from the material world of land deeds and into the potent, traditional realm of the spiritual. The northern cliffs were widely recognized as the domain of the Aitu, and the photographer's intrusion into this sacred space during a time of thick and natural mist was seen by many as a profound act of sacrilege. Some began to whisper that the photographer had not been killed by a person, but by the land itself, or rather, by those who saw themselves as the chosen protectors of the island's ancient sanctity. This line of inquiry suggested that the photographer might have inadvertently photographed a sacred ritual, a hidden shrine, or a location of such immense spiritual significance that his very knowledge of its existence was considered a contamination. In this narrative, the violence inflicted upon him was not a simple murder, but a ritualistic purging, a way to reclaim the silence and the secrecy of the land of the spirits, while the police remained focused on human suspects. They could not ignore the fact that the psychological weight of these beliefs provided a powerful, culturally specific motive for a community that felt its most sacred traditions were under siege by the encroaching modern world. The third and perhaps most chilling possibility was the presence of a Katha ACDNDN, an anonymous predator, or a small, marginalized group living on the absolute fringes of island society. Tutuila, despite its small size, contained vast areas of vertical, nearly impenetrable wilderness where a person could remain hidden for years. There were reports of individuals who had retreated into the forest to escape the pressures of village life or the consequences of previous crimes, surviving on the bounty of the land and the occasional theft. To such a person, the photographer represented an unprecedented opportunity and a significant threat. He carried expensive equipment that could be bartered in the underground economy of the shipping ports, and his presence threatened the absolute isolation that these forest dwellers relied upon for their survival. The forensic evidence of the camera being found with the body, but with its film destroyed and its body battered, suggested a strange duality. The killer either did not understand the value of the equipment, or they were more concerned with destroying the vision of the outsider than with the financial gain. This suggested a motive born of paranoia and a desperate desire to remain unseen, leading to a frantic attack and a subsequent attempt to erase the evidence of the encounter by casting the victim and his tools into the abyss. Each of these theories presented a different face of the same terrifying reality: the photographer's quest for a pure, unvarnished truth had led him into a collision with a world that operated on rules he did not understand and could not navigate. The investigation stalled as it hit a wall of silence. The people of the villages near the northern cliffs were not uncooperative, but they were profoundly protective of their own. They spoke in riddles, referencing the spirits and the ancient laws of the land, while the physical suspects remained as elusive as the morning mist. The forensic report remained the only solid ground in a shifting sea of cultural complexity and ancient tradition. It was a document of bone and blade that stood in silent, defiant opposition to the convenient narrative of an accident. As the months passed and the tropical rains continued to wash over the island, the case of the missing photographer became a haunting presence in the local consciousness. It was a story of a man who looked too closely at a place that did not want to be seen, and who paid the ultimate price for his curiosity. The investigation had moved through the stages of discovery and forensic revelation, but it now sat at a crossroads of deep uncertainty. with the truth buried somewhere between the physical evidence of a sharp-edged tool and the impenetrable green silence of the Tutuila wilderness. The question of who held the blade and why they waited for 2 days before ending the photographer's life remained a dark, festering wound on the heart of the island, a mystery that refused to be silenced by the passing of time or the closing of a police file. The transition from the sterile, shadowed confines of the medical examiner's office to the formal, stifling atmosphere of the High Court in Pago Pago marked a significant shift in the trajectory of the investigation, moving the mystery from a biological inquiry into a legal and social confrontation. In the humid heat of the mid-1970s, the courthouse became a focal point of intense international pressure and local anxiety, as the authorities were forced to grapple with a forensic report that directly contradicted their initial, comforting conclusions. The legal proceedings that followed were not a criminal trial in the traditional sense, as there was no named defendant and no individual had been formally charged with the photographer's murder. Instead, the process took the form of a high-stakes coroner's inquest, a formal judicial inquiry designed to determine the precise cause and manner of death when the circumstances remained suspicious or unexplained. This inquiry was a public reckoning, a moment where the cold, objective findings of forensic science were forced to collide with the deep, protective silence of the island's traditional social structures. The courtroom itself was a space of profound tension, characterized by the rhythmic, mechanical whirring of heavy ceiling fans that struggled to circulate the thick, salt-laden air, and the crowded benches filled with journalists, concerned local residents, and stern-faced village leaders who watched the proceedings with a mixture of stoic indifference and underlying wariness. It was within this pressured environment that the trial of the evidence began, as the legal system attempted to forge a definitive narrative out of the broken bones and shattered equipment that had been recovered from the dark heart of the Tutuila wilderness. The centerpiece of the inquiry was the testimony of the forensic pathologist, whose detailed findings provided the only solid link to the violence that had occurred on the northern plateau. When he took the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom noticeably shifted, turning from speculative murmuring to a heavy, expectant silence. He presented his evidence with a clinical, detached precision that made the details of the trauma feel even more chillingly visceral. He laid out the photographs of the skeletal remains, pointing specifically to the linear, mechanical nicks on the ribs and the femur marks that he stated with absolute certainty were the result of a sharp-edged metal tool, most likely a machete or a heavy brush knife, being applied with significant force. The pathologist's testimony systematically dismantled the theory of an accidental fall, explaining that while the final impact in the ravine had certainly caused massive fractures, these specific sharp force injuries had occurred while the victim was still alive and upright. He detailed the evidence of biological vital reaction in the bone tissue, which indicated that the photographer had survived for a period of at least 48 hours following the initial attack. This revelation was the most haunting aspect of the proceedings, forcing everyone in the room to envision a scenario where the victim had been incapacitated, perhaps held captive or pursued through the dense jungle, before his life was finally extinguished by the fall into the abyss. The legal question was no longer whether a crime had been committed, but rather who possessed the motive and the opportunity to commit such a prolonged and brutal act in one of the most isolated locations on the island. As the inquiry progressed, the focus shifted to the interrogation of various witnesses who might shed light on the photographer's final movements and the possible motivations for the attack. The hotel staff testified about his quiet, unassuming demeanor and his singular focus on his work, while the members of the search party described the terrifying geography of the northern cliffs where the body was found. However, the most significant and tense moments of the inquiry occurred when the leaders and residents of the villages nearest to the northern coast were called to give evidence. The legal team representing the government, feeling the intense pressure from the photographer's home country to produce a result, attempted to probe into the issues of land disputes and cultural boundaries. They questioned the village Madai or high chiefs about any potential confrontations between locals and the photographer, or if there were individuals known for guarding the disputed communal lands with violence. The response from the witnesses was a masterpiece of guarded, traditional stoicism. They spoke of the land not as a commodity to be fought over in a Western legal sense, but as a sacred heritage protected by ancient laws and spiritual entities. They consistently denied any knowledge of a human confrontation, instead subtly shifting the narrative back toward the realm of the supernatural. Referencing the Aitu and the inherent dangers of the land of the spirits, this wall of cultural protection proved to be impenetrable. While the forensic evidence pointed toward a human hand holding a blade, the social reality of the island ensured that no hand could be identified and no motive could be definitively proven. The search for the murder weapon, the specific machete or tool that had left its signature on the photographer's bones, became a central, though ultimately futile, theme of the investigation's legal results. The police conducted a series of highly controversial and poorly executed sweeps through the plantations and homes of the northern districts, confiscating dozens of agricultural tools for forensic testing. However, the 1970s were a time of limited forensic technology in the South Pacific and the ability to match microstriations on bone to a specific, well-used blade was practically non-existent. Furthermore, the machete was an ubiquitous tool on the island, used daily for everything from clearing brush to harvesting coconuts, making it impossible to single out a specific weapon as an instrument of murder without direct witness testimony or a confession. The lack of a physical murder weapon, combined with the absolute silence of the local community, meant that the legal inquiry was effectively starved of the material evidence needed to name a suspect. The results of the investigation were beginning to look less like a criminal conviction and more like a long-term diplomatic and legal stalemate, leaving the photographer's family and the international observers in a state of mounting frustration and unresolved grief. The formal result of the coroner's inquiry, delivered by the presiding judge after several weeks of testimony, was a ruling of homicide by person or persons unknown. While this was a significant victory for those who had argued against the accident theory, it was a hollow one in terms of actual justice. The judge's final statement was a sobering reflection on the limitations of the law when faced with a crime committed in the absolute isolation of the wilderness and protected by a collective social silence. The ruling officially acknowledged that the photographer had been the victim of a violent crime, that he had suffered significant sharp force trauma prior to his death, and that his fall into the ravine had been the final act of a fatal encounter. However, the inquiry also concluded that there was insufficient evidence to identify any specific individual as the perpetrator. This open verdict meant that the case remained technically active, but effectively cold, a permanent stain on the police records and a lingering shadow over the island's reputation. The legal system had succeeded in identifying the nature of the tragedy, but it had failed utterly to identify the author of that tragedy, leaving the why and the who buried as deeply as the photographer's body had been in the dark crevasse. The immediate aftermath of the inquiry saw a rapid and somewhat forced attempt at closure by the local administration. The photographer's physical remains, which had been the subject of such intense scrutiny and debate, were finally released to his family for repatriation. The process of shipping the remains back across the Pacific was a somber and bureaucratic affair, involving complex international paperwork and the physical sealing of the heavy, lead-lined casket. For the family, this was the beginning of a different kind of endurance, the lifelong burden of knowing that a loved one had been murdered in a beautiful, distant paradise, and that the person responsible was likely still walking the same forest paths and tending the same plantations where the crime occurred. Back on Tutuila, the official police files were organized, bound in thick folders, and moved from the active investigation desks to the silent, dusty archives of the Pago Pago headquarters. The case was filed, a bureaucratic euphemism for a mystery that the authorities no longer had the resources or the political will to solve. The result was a profound, unresolved void that sat at the heart of the island's modern history, a story that people preferred to whisper about rather than discuss in the bright light of day. The impact of the inquiry's result on the local community was equally complex and enduring. For the residents of the northern districts, the investigation had been a period of intense scrutiny and perceived disrespect for their traditions and their privacy. The ruling of homicide, while scientifically accurate, was often viewed locally as a Western imposition. an attempt to blame the community for a tragedy that many still believed was a manifestation of the island's own spiritual power. The I-2 theory did not go away with the judge's ruling. If anything, it was strengthened by the fact that no human killer was ever found. To many, the lack of a conviction was proof that the photographer had indeed crossed a line that was not governed by the laws of men, and that the spirits had claimed their due in a way that the police could never understand or prosecute. This cultural divide between the forensic reality of the blade and the spiritual reality of the land remained a defining feature of the case's legacy, ensuring that the truth would always be viewed through two entirely different lenses that could never be reconciled. In the decades that have followed that final, inconclusive day in the Pago Pago courtroom, the case of the murdered photographer has passed from a current event into the realm of local legend and true crime folklore. The results of the legal process are now seen as a cautionary tale about the intersection of modern exploration and ancient, protective cultures. The case remains a permanent fixture on the lists of unsolved mysteries of the Pacific, a chilling reminder that even in an era of global travel, there are places where the silence of the land is more powerful than the voice of the law. The photographer's quest for a permanent, captured image of the island's beauty resulted instead in a permanent, unresolved mystery of its violence. The official result of the inquiry that he was killed by person or persons unknown remains the final word on the matter, a legal admission of failure that leaves the door forever open to speculation, fear, and the enduring, dark mystery of what truly happened during those 48 hours of survival in the hidden shadows of the Tutuila Cliffs. The case was closed, the remains were returned, and the files were archived, but the truth remains as elusive and atmospheric as the morning mist that first swallowed him whole. A haunting echo of a crime that the world could see, but the island would never allow it to touch. More than half a century has now flipped into the vast, rhythmic pulse of the Pacific Ocean since that mist-choked morning in the 1970s when a solitary man with a heavy Leica camera vanished into the emerald shadows of the Tutuila Cliffs. Time, in its relentless and indifferent progression, has a profound way of softening the sharp edges of tragedy, turning the immediate, visceral terror of a disappearance into the muted, dusty pages of a forgotten history. Today, the official files concerning the photographer who never returned from the northern plateau sit in the deep, silent drawers of administrative archives in Pago Pago. Their covers yellowed by decades of intense tropical humidity and their ink slowly fading into illegibility. These documents, once the center of a frantic international incident and a heated forensic debate, have transitioned from an active pursuit of justice into a static relic of a different era. The world has moved forward with staggering speed, replacing the analog isolation of the 70s with a global network of instant communication and satellite surveillance that makes the idea of a man simply vanishing into the woods seem like a ghostly myth from a distant, less scrutinized past. Yet, for those who remember the case, and for the island itself, the mystery remains as potent and impenetrable as the day the recovery team first smelled death rising from the deep, narrow crevasse. The passage of 50 years has not provided the clarity that the investigators so desperately sought. Instead, it has only thickened the layer of silence that surrounds the photographer's final, agonizing hours. The consequences of this case extend far beyond the legal stalemate of an open verdict or the bureaucratic closing of a police folder. It represents a permanent, unresolved fracture in the relationship between the outside world's desire to document and the island's ancient, inherent right to remain unseen. The photographer came to Tutuila as a seeker of light, a man whose entire existence was dedicated to the belief that the world could be understood, categorized, and mastered through the lens of a camera. He represented the quintessential Western explorer of his time, armed with the best technology and a profound sense of individual agency, believing that no terrain was too remote and no mystery too deep for his mechanical eye to capture. His death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a violent collision between that modern ambition and a landscape that operates on a different, much older set of rules. The primary consequence of his journey was the total erasure of his vision. The very film that held his final perspective was destroyed by the environment he sought to immortalize, leaving the world with a haunting void where a masterpiece should have been. This loss serves as a somber reflection on the frailty of human record-keeping when faced with the overwhelming, destructive power of the natural and social forces that govern the remote corners of the earth. The island did not just take his life, it took his story, ensuring that the only narrative remaining is one of violence, confusion, and impenetrable darkness. Reflecting on the nature of the tragedy, one is forced to confront the three primary possibilities that have haunted the case for over 5 decades, each representing a different facet of the island's complex identity. The first, and most palatable for the authorities, was the theory of a simple, tragic accident. It is a possibility that requires the least amount of social or political upheaval, suggesting that the photographer was merely a victim of his own creative obsession and the treacherous geography of the northern cliffs. In this version of the story, the mist was the only antagonist, and the jagged rocks of the ravine were the only executioners. It is a narrative that offers a sense of closure without blame, allowing the island to maintain its reputation as a beautiful paradise that is occasionally, and purely by chance, dangerous. However, this theory is perpetually undermined by the cold, hard reality of the forensic evidence. The nicks on the bone, the mechanical precision of the cuts, and the terrifying biological evidence of a 48-hour survival period after the initial attack stand as silent, defiant witnesses against the comfort of a simple accident. The accident theory remains a convenient veil, but it is one that has been permanently torn by the sharp edge of a medical examiner's report, leaving behind a nagging, unsettling doubt that no amount of time can fully erase. The second possibility, the dark reality of a human crime hidden beneath a layer of cultural silence, remains the most probable yet the most elusive explanation. The evidence of a sharp-edged tool and the timing of the injuries point directly to a human hand, suggesting a motive born of the very real, very modern tensions that defined life on the island in the 70s. Whether it was a territorial dispute over communal land or a sudden, paranoid reaction to a stranger with a camera, this theory suggests that the photographer was a victim of a society protecting its own boundaries. The consequence of this possibility is a lingering, heavy sense of collective secrecy. If a person or a group of people committed this act, they did so within the context of a community that chose to protect its own rather than yield to the demands of a foreign legal system. This silence is not necessarily a sign of malice, but perhaps a sign of a profound, defensive solidarity. It reflects a world where the laws of the village and the family are older and more binding than the laws of the courthouse. The result is a crime that everyone may have understood, but no one would ever name, leaving the perpetrator to live out their life in the same sun-drenched villages, while the victim's family was left with an empty, lead-lined casket and 1,000 unanswered questions. The third possibility, which sits at the intersection of the physical and the metaphysical, is the one that continues to resonate most deeply with the local imagination, the idea of a spiritual retribution or the wrath of the nature. For many on Tutuila, the forensic evidence of a blade does not necessarily exclude the presence of the Aitu. In this worldview, the human hand that held the machete was merely the instrument of a larger, angrier force that had been disturbed by the outsider's intrusion into the sacred northern cliffs. This reflection takes us into the heart of the island's spiritual landscape, where the land itself is believed to possess a memory and a will. The photographer's death, in this context, was a ritualistic necessity, a way for the island to reclaim its silence and push back against the encroaching gaze of the modern world. The fact that the film was destroyed and the body was hidden in a location of such profound isolation is seen not as a coincidence, but as a deliberate act of spiritual concealment. This line of thought suggests that there are truths that are not meant to be photographed and places that are not meant to be visited by those who do not belong to the ancestors. The enduring consequence of this belief is a lingering, fearful respect for the Northern Plateau, a place that remains largely avoided even by the generations that have grown up in the age of the internet and global travel. The human cost of this mystery is most poignantly felt in the void left in the lives of the photographer's family and colleagues. For them, Tutuila is not a paradise, but a graveyard of ambition and a site of permanent, unresolved grief. They are left to wonder about those 48 hours of survival that the medical examiner identified. What were his thoughts as he lay at the bottom of that dark, damp ravine, or as he sat incapacitated in the dense jungle, knowing that the beautiful light he had come to capture was slowly fading into a final, eternal darkness? The lack of a conviction and the absence of a clear motive mean that their mourning can never truly reach a state of peace. They are trapped in a perpetual cycle of what if and why, their memories of a vibrant, talented man forever tethered to the gruesome details of a forensic report. This is the true legacy of an unsolved crime in a remote location, the way it stretches the agony of the loss across continents and decades, creating a bridge of sorrow that never reaches the other side. The photographer's work, which should have been his lasting contribution to the world, was instead replaced by a mystery that has become his only lasting legacy. A tragic irony that defines the end of his journey. As we look back on this case after half a century, the island of Tutuila remains, in many ways, unchanged. The waves still crash with thunderous violence against the northern cliffs. The mist still rolls in from the Pacific to swallow the volcanic peaks and the dense green labyrinth of the rainforest continues to guard its secrets with a silent, ancient indifference. The ravine where the body was found is still there, a hidden wound in the earth that has long since been overgrown by giant tree ferns and black moss, erasing any physical sign of the recovery team's presence. The island has a way of absorbing trauma and folding it into its own long, complex history, treating the death of a single man as a minor passing event in the grand scale of geological and ancestral time. The photographer sought to capture the essence of this place, but the place ended up capturing him, proving that some landscapes are too vast, too old, and too protective to be contained within the frame of a camera. The answer to whether it was an accident, a crime, or a spiritual judgment remains buried as deeply as the shattered Lika, lost in the shadows where the law cannot reach and the light cannot penetrate. Ultimately, the story of the photographer at Tutuila serves as a profound meditation on the limits of human understanding and the enduring power of the unknown. It reminds us that despite our modern technology and our forensic certainty, there are still voids in our knowledge that cannot be filled. The case sits in the archives not just as a failure of the police, but as a testament to the fact that some mysteries are fundamental to the places where they occur. The silence of the ravine is not just an absence of noise. It is a presence, a heavy, atmospheric weight that tells us that the truth of what happened in the 1970s has been veiledly and permanently claimed by the land itself. We are left only with the reflections, the image of a man walking into the mist, the glint of a blade in the green shadows, and the sound of the ocean waves that continue to drum out a rhythm of indifference over a grave that has no name. The photographer's journey ended in a darkness he never expected to find, leaving the rest of us to look at the beautiful, jagged horizon of the South Pacific and wonder what other secrets are waiting to be swallowed by the morning fog. The case is closed. The world has moved on, but the spirit of the mystery remains a haunting, permanent resident of the Tutuila Cliffs, ensuring that the man who went looking for the frame of a lifetime found instead the infinite, terrifying silence of the abyss. The finality of a closed police file rarely equates to the finality of human curiosity, and in the specific case of the photographer who vanished into the Tutuila mist, the silence that followed the mid-70s inquest has only served to amplify the haunting echoes of the northern cliffs. As we stand now in a modern world defined by global connectivity and the total erasure of distance, the geographical and cultural landscape of American Samoa has undergone a slow but inevitable transformation, yet the specific ravine that claimed the life of the adventurer remains a dark, unyielding monument to the limits of human intrusion. We must consider the profound weight of those 48 hours of survival that were etched so indelibly into the victim's skeletal remains, a forensic detail that serves as the most harrowing anchor of this entire narrative. This was not a quick or merciful departure from the physical world. It was a prolonged, solitary struggle in an environment that offered no comfort and no escape. A period where the boundary between the living world and the land of the spirits was not merely a cultural metaphor but a terrifying, physical reality. The psychological horror of being incapacitated at the bottom of a deep volcanic fissure, surrounded by the deafening roar of the Pacific and the suffocating humidity of the jungle, is a nightmare that continues to resonate with anyone who encounters this story. It forces us to ask what was truly lost in that abyss, not just a life and a camera, but the very possibility of a reconciliation between the observer and the observed. In the decades that followed the initial tragedy, the island of Tutuila has seen the arrival of new generations, new technologies, and a new understanding of its own history. The 1970s, with their analog limitations and deep-seated cultural isolations, have faded into a nostalgic haze. Yet the case of the murdered photographer continues to surface in the collective consciousness of the local community. It is a story whispered in the villages of the northern coast, a cautionary tale told to young people who might be tempted to wander too far from the established paths. The Aitu of the northern cliffs are no longer just figures of ancient mythology. They have become inextricably linked to the physical reality of the photographer's death. For the local people, the failure of the police to identify a human killer was not a sign of investigative incompetence, but rather a confirmation that the crime belonged to the island itself. This spiritual integration of the tragedy has ensured its survival as a living legend, a narrative where the blade that marked the bones was not held by a man, but by the very essence of a landscape that felt its sanctity had been violated by the intrusive lens of a Western stranger. From a modern forensic perspective, the case remains a frustrating masterpiece of unresolved evidence. Today, with the advent of advanced DNA sequencing and high-resolution micro-CT scanning, the skeletal remains might have yielded a different kind of testimony. Perhaps the person or persons unknown left a biological signature that the 1970s could not detect. But the remains are gone, returned to a distant Earth thousands of miles away, and the evidence has been reclaimed by time. What remains is the documentation of photographs of the bones, the sketches of the ravine, and the contradictory testimonies of the inquest. These papers are a testament to a moment in forensic history where science could identify the violence, but lacked the social and technological tools to name the perpetrator. The sharp force trauma, so clearly mechanical and so clearly intentional, stands as a permanent indictment of the accident theory, a cold and objective fact that refuses to be softened by the passage of 50 years. It is the one piece of truth that the island could not fully absorb or hide, a sharp, metallic reminder that the photographer's journey ended not with a fall, but with a confrontation. The Leica camera, found shattered and ruined at the bottom of the crevasse, has become the primary symbol of the case's enduring mystery. In the world of professional photography, the Leica is a tool of truth, a precision instrument designed to capture the world exactly as it is. But in the context of the Tutuila mystery, the camera represents the ultimate failure of observation. It failed to protect its owner, and it failed to preserve the image of his final moments. The destruction of the film is perhaps the most tragic consequence of the entire event, as it represents the total loss of the photographer's final perspective. We are left to wonder what he saw in those final hours before the first blade strike. Was it a breathtaking vista of the northern coast, or was it the face of his assailant? The missing frame of the Tutuila mystery is a void that can never be filled, a visual silence that echoes the physical silence of the ravine. It serves as a reminder that there are some things the camera is not meant to see and some images that the world is not meant to possess. As we reflect on the legacy of the case, we must also consider the ethical dimension of the photographer's pursuit. He was a man driven by the desire to find the unseen, to document a landscape that he viewed as a wild, untouched frontier. But for the people of Tutuila, the northern cliffs were not an untouched wilderness. They were a deeply familiar, sacred, and contested home. The photographer's presence was a collision between two fundamentally different ways of seeing the world. One view saw the land as a subject for art and exploration, while the other saw it as a source of identity, history, and spiritual power. The tragedy of the case lies in the total lack of communication between these two perspectives. The photographer died for an image that he never got to show, and the island protected a secret that it never intended to share. This cultural impasse is the true cold case of Tutuila, a mystery that cannot be solved by forensic science alone, but only by a deeper understanding of the complex, often violent relationship between the modern world and the ancient territories it seeks to document. The Keitha AC Diandan, the anonymous killer, remains the most chilling shadow in this story. If it was indeed a human hand that held the blade, that person lived out the rest of their life in the small, interconnected world of the island, carrying the weight of those 48 hours of survival within them. They would have walked the same trails, fished in the same waters, and perhaps even participated in the search for the man they had killed. The idea of a murderer hiding in plain sight, protected by the collective silence of a community, is a recurring theme in true crime, but in the context of a small Pacific island, it takes on a uniquely claustrophobic quality. The secret of the photographer's death became a part of the island's social fabric, a dark thread woven into the history of the northern villages. This silence was not just a legal strategy. It was a way of preserving the island's internal equilibrium, a refusal to allow an outside tragedy to dictate the terms of their communal life. The consequence of this silence for the photographer's family has been a half-century of unresolved mourning. They were left with a narrative that had a beginning and a horrific middle, but no ending. The open verdict of the inquest provided no path toward forgiveness or closure, only a permanent state of questioning. Their grief is a silent, enduring echo of the tragedy, a reminder that the ripples of a crime committed in a remote tropical ravine can reach across an entire ocean and last for a lifetime. For them, the beautiful images of the South Pacific will always be colored by the knowledge of what lies beneath the surface, not just the coral reefs and the azure water, but the dark, jagged stone of a ravine where a loved one's life was violently and inexplicably taken. Their loss is the ultimate human cost of the mystery, a weight that no legal ruling or forensic report can ever truly alleviate. Today, the northern cliffs of Tutuila remain as imposing and beautiful as they were in the 1970s. The vegetation is as dense, the humidity as thick, and the ocean as relentless. If you were to stand at the edge of the plateau today, you would see the same mist rolling in from the sea, softening the jagged lines of the volcanic rock and turning the jungle into a realm of ghosts. The photographer's story has become a part of the atmosphere of the place, a layer of history that sits just beneath the surface of the landscape. It is a story of a man who went looking for the wild and found a reality that was far more brutal and complex than his camera could ever capture. The island of Tutuila has moved on, its people navigating the challenges of the 21st century, but the mystery of the 1970s remains a silent and moving presence in the dark heart of the forest. In the final analysis, the case of the murdered photographer is a story about the power of the unseen. It is a reminder that in our quest to document every corner of the world, we must be prepared for the fact that some places will resist being captured. The island of Tutuila held its secret tightly, using the mist, the jungle, and the silence of its people to protect a truth that it considered its own. The photographer's quest for a visual masterpiece ended in a forensic nightmare, but it also created a different kind of masterpiece, a story that continues to haunt, to challenge, and to provoke. It is a story of light and shadow, of bone and blade, and of the enduring, impenetrable mystery of a land that refuses to be tamed by the lens of a camera or the laws of men. The case remains open, the truth remains hidden, and the photographer remains a ghost in the mist, a permanent inhabitant of the northern cliffs, forever searching for the frame that he lost in the abyss. As we close this narrative, we are left with a final image of the island at twilight. The sun is sinking below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows over the volcanic peaks and the sheer northern precipices. The sound of the ocean is a constant, thunderous roar, a rhythm that has continued uninterrupted for millennia. Somewhere in the dense, green heart of the forest, the ravine that once held a terrible secret is now a place of silence and growth, its jagged walls covered in life. Its dark depths hidden from the sky, the photographer is gone, the Lika is dust, and the inquest is a memory. But the mystery of Tutuila persists, a haunting reminder that in the wild, ancient places of the earth, the truth is not something to be found, but something to be respected. The case of person or persons unknown remains the final word, a legacy of darkness that will forever define the mist-choked peaks of American Samoa. The story ends where it began, in the silence of the cliffs, in the shadow of the jungle, and in the enduring, terrifying beauty of the unknown. There are no more frames to capture, no more questions to ask, only the long, slow passage of time over a land that remembers everything and tells nothing. The photographer's journey is finally over, but the mystery of his death is eternal as the sea itself. The passage of decades into the mid-20s has done little to diminish the spectral presence of the photographer's case within the collective memory of Tutuila, as the mystery has transitioned from a lived tragedy into a permanent fixture of the island's atmospheric identity. In the contemporary era, the way we consume and interact with such stories has been fundamentally altered by the advent of the digital age. Yet the specific details of this 1970s disappearance continue to resist the clarifying light of modern information systems. While other cold cases from that era have been solved through the miracle of genealogical DNA or the sudden discovery of long-lost physical evidence, the Tutuila mystery remains encased in a layer of impenetrable tropical silence. The physical archives in Pago Pago, which once held the vibrant, urgent details of the search and the subsequent homicide investigation, have become a quiet repository of faded ink and brittle paper, mirroring the way the jungle has slowly and methodically reclaimed the site of the crime itself. To look at the case today is to look at a ghost through a glass darkly, a narrative that is defined more by what is missing than by what was found. The destruction of the photographer's final roll of film remains the most symbolic loss of the entire event, a void in the visual record that ensures the world will never see the island through his eyes during those final, fateful moments. This absence of a visual conclusion has allowed the story to grow and mutate in the fertile soil of local folklore and international true crime speculation, where the lack of a definitive answer provides an endless canvas for the imagination. The modern experience of the Northern Cliffs is one of profound, haunting beauty that is always shadowed by the knowledge of what occurred beneath the dense green canopy more than 50 years ago. Today's travelers and researchers who venture toward the Northern Plateau do so with tools that the photographer could never have imagined: GPS trackers, high-resolution satellite imagery, and drones that can peer into the deepest ravines from the safety of the sky. Yet, even with these technological advantages, the terrain remains as formidable and unforgiving as it was in the 70s. The sheer volcanic precipices still drop vertically into the churning Pacific, and the thick, humid mist still rolls in from the ocean to swallow the landscape in an instant, reminding us that nature's power to conceal is far greater than man's power to observe. The specific ravine where the recovery team found the remains is now a place of profound ecological density, where the giant tree ferns have grown even larger and the black moss has thickened over the jagged stone walls. To stand at the edge of that abyss today is to feel the weight of a history that refuses to be resolved, a place where the air still feels heavy with the unresolved tension between the physical world and the spiritual realm that the locals have always respected. The geographical isolation that once protected a killer now protects a legend, ensuring that the truth of the photographer's final hours remains a secret held exclusively by the land itself. One of the most persistent and disturbing consequences of the case is the way it has forced a permanent re-evaluation of the outsider's gaze in remote and traditional cultures. The photographer's death is often cited by modern anthropologists and historians as a tragic example of the dangers of aesthetic entitlement to believe that everything in the world is a subject for the camera and that no boundary is too sacred for the artist. This perspective does not seek to justify the violence of the attack, but rather to understand the profound cultural friction that created the conditions for such a tragedy. The 48 hours of survival that the photographer endured after the initial sharp force trauma represent a period of unimaginable suffering, but they also represent a period of total, terrifying isolation from his own world. In those hours, he was no longer an explorer or an artist. He was a man trapped in a reality that his camera could not mediate and his culture could not explain. This realization serves as a somber reflection on the vulnerability of the individual when they step outside the protective structures of their own society and into a space governed by ancient, unspoken, and fiercely guarded laws. The case remains a cautionary tale for the modern age of travel, reminding us that the blank spaces on the map are often filled with histories and beliefs that are invisible to those who only look through a viewfinder. The psychological impact on the villages of the northern coast has also evolved over the generations, moving from a period of defensive silence to a more nuanced, almost reverent form of storytelling. The children and grandchildren of those who lived through the search and the inquest now inherit a story that is part of their ancestral heritage. For them, the photographer is a permanent ghost of the land, a figure who serves as a reminder of the power of the Idu and the importance of respecting the communal boundaries of the family estates. The identity of the person or persons unknown who held the blade may still be known to some within the inner circles of the old families, but that knowledge has become a part of the island's internal equilibrium, a secret that is passed down with the understanding that it must never be shared with the world outside. This collective protection is not seen as a conspiracy of silence, but as an act of cultural survival, a way of ensuring that the island's own narrative is not overwritten by the legal and moral requirements of a foreign power. The result is a crime that has been absorbed into the mythology of the island, where the line between a human act of violence and a spiritual act of retribution has become permanently blurred. The enduring mystery of the sharp force trauma continues to be the most discussed aspect of the case in modern forensic and true crime circles, where the lack of a murder weapon remains a glaring, unresolved void. In the decades since the inquest, there have been occasional rumors of old, blood-stained machetes being found in the forest or hidden within the foundations of ancestral homes. But none of these leads have ever been officially pursued or verified. The ubiquity of the tool on the island means that the murder weapon is essentially hidden in plain sight, a part of the everyday life of the community that can never be singled out as an instrument of death. This realization adds a layer of quiet, domestic horror to the story, suggesting that the violence was committed with the same tool used to harvest food and clear the path for the next generation. The fact that the killer, or killers, could return to their daily lives and use the same blade for peaceful purposes speaks to a profound and unsettling capacity for compartmentalization, or perhaps a belief that the act was a necessary, even righteous, defense of the land. This ambiguity is what makes the case so persistent. It refuses to fit into the standard categories of criminal psychology, existing instead in a space where the motives are as complex and layered as the jungle itself. Reflecting on the role of the Leica camera in this tragedy provides a final, poignant lens through which to view the photographer's legacy. The camera was a masterpiece of human engineering, a device built to withstand the harshest environments and to provide an objective record of the world. Yet, in the deep ravine of Tutuila, it proved to be as fragile as the man who carried it. The destruction of the glass and the seizing of the mechanical gear serve as a metaphor for the failure of the modern world to fully grasp the reality of the ancient one. The ruined film is a testament to the fact that some truths are too intense, too violent, or too sacred to be captured and preserved. We are left with a story that is told in the language of bone and blade, rather than the language of light and shadow. This shift in the narrative medium from the photograph to the forensic report is the ultimate consequence of the crime, ensuring that the photographer's final contribution to the world was not a visual masterpiece, but a haunting, unanswered question. The camera remains a ghost at the bottom of a ravine, a silent witness to a tragedy that it was never meant to record. As we conclude this deep dive into the 1970s mystery of the island of Tutuila, we are left with the image of the mist, the same mist that rolled in 50 years ago and the same mist that will roll in tomorrow. It is the only element of the story that remains entirely unchanged, a natural force that continues to provide the perfect cover for the secrets of the land. The photographer's disappearance into that fog was the beginning of a journey that led him into the heart of a darkness he could not understand. And the fact that he never came back is a reminder that some journeys are one way. The case of the missing and murdered photographer is more than just a true crime story. It is a meditation on the nature of mystery itself, and the way that certain places and certain events refuse to be resolved. The homicide by person or persons unknown verdict is not a failure of the law, but an admission of the law's limits when faced with the profound, protective power of an ancient culture and an indifferent wilderness. The photographer rests in a distant earth, his work unfinished and his killer unnamed, but his story remains a permanent resident of the northern cliffs. A haunting echo that will continue to drift through the green shadows of Tutuila for as long as the waves continue to crash against the shore. The final word on the matter belongs not to the police, the lawyers, or the historians, but to the island itself. Tutuila has moved on, its beauty remains as staggering as ever, and its secrets remain as deeply buried as the day they were first created. The mystery of the 70s has become a part of the island's breathing tropical reality, a story that is told by the wind in the tree ferns and the rain on the volcanic rock. We are left only with the reflections, the image of a man seeking the light, the glint of a hidden blade, and the 48 hours of silence that followed. The truth is there, somewhere in the narrow crevasse behind the giant ferns, but it is a truth that the world is not permitted to know. The case is filed, the remains are returned, and the mist continues to roll in, ensuring that the secrets of the land of the spirits remain exactly where they belong, in the shadows, in the silence, and in the eternal embrace of the Tutuila cliffs. The photographer's quest for the frame of a lifetime resulted in a mystery of a lifetime, a story that ends not with an answer, but with a lingering, atmospheric question that will haunt the South Pacific forever. There are no more frames to develop, no more bones to examine, and no more paths to follow. The story is complete in its incompleteness, a permanent monument to the power of the unknown and the enduring silence of the wild. The physical legacy of the photographer who vanished into the Tutuila mist now exists primarily as a collection of brittle, yellowing papers stored in the back of a climate-controlled archive, far removed from the humid, salt-laden air that originally birthed the tragedy. In the 5 decades since the High Court in Tago Pago delivered its inconclusive verdict, the case has undergone a slow but definitive transformation from a high-stakes international investigation into a haunting piece of local true crime lore. The ink on the official police reports has begun to fade, and the names of the investigators, witnesses, and suspects have mostly slipped into the quiet anonymity of history. Yet, for those who seek to understand the intersection of human violence and the raw, unyielding power of the natural world, the story of the 1970s photographer remains a profound and disturbing case study. It is a narrative that refuses to be resolved because its core elements, the missing film, the 48 hours of survival, and the signature of the blade, defy the standard logic of accidental death or simple criminal intent. As we move further into the 21st century, the mystery has become less about the search for a specific killer and more about a reflection on the boundaries of human knowledge and the enduring, protective silence of the island itself. The most haunting detail of the entire case, and the one that continues to generate the most intense speculation, is the 48-hour window of survival that was identified by the forensic pathologist. This was not a quick, catastrophic accident, nor was it an instant execution. It was a prolonged, excruciating ordeal that took place in one of the most isolated and vertical landscapes on the planet. We are left to contemplate the psychological and physical experience of a man who was an expert observer, now trapped in a situation he could not document and could not escape. During those 2 days, the photographer was no longer looking through a lens. He was looking directly into the face of his own mortality. He was surrounded by the overwhelming, chaotic noise of the Pacific Ocean and the suffocating, green density of the rainforest. Hearing the sounds of the island, but knowing that his own voice would never reach the ears of the search parties just a few hundred yards above him. This period of survival is the true black box of the mystery, a time when the truth of what happened was still alive, still breathing, but was already being swallowed by the shadows of the ravine. The fact that he lived for 2 days after the initial sharp force attack suggests a level of human endurance that is both inspiring and deeply tragic, highlighting the absolute loneliness of his final struggle. The signature of the blade on the victim's bones remains the ultimate indictment of the island's attempt to label the death an accident. Those precise, mechanical nicks on the ribs and the femur are the only surviving witnesses to the presence of another human being in that forbidden territory. In the context of 1970s Tutuila, the machete was not just a tool. It was a symbol of the relationship between the people and their land. It was used to clear the brush, to harvest the food, and to mark the boundaries of the family estates. The realization that such a common, domestic tool was used to inflict such a brutal and calculated trauma on a stranger is a chilling reflection on the duality of the island's culture. The blade that provided life for the village was the same blade that took the life of the outsider. This paradox is at the heart of the person or persons unknown verdict, as it suggests that the killer was not a monster from outside the community, but someone who was intimately integrated into its daily rhythms and traditional laws. The mystery persists because the weapon was ubiquitous, and the motive was deeply buried in the complex, protective social structures that define life in the South Pacific. As we consider the consequences of this case for the photographer's family, we are forced to confront the reality of intergenerational grief. The children and grandchildren of the man who went to Tutuila to capture the beauty of the world have grown up with a story that has no ending. For them, the island is a place of permanent loss, a geographical void where a husband, father, and artist was erased. The lack of a conviction and the absence of a clear motive have meant that their mourning has remained in a state of suspended animation, never reaching the peace that comes with justice. They are left with only the artifacts of his career, the early photographs, the letters home, and the heavy equipment that was eventually returned to them. But the most important artifact, the final roll of film, is gone forever. This loss is perhaps the most poignant aspect of the family's burden, as it represents the total destruction of the photographer's last living perspective. They will never know what he saw, what he valued, or what he was trying to tell the world in his final moments, leaving them with a silence that is as deep and narrow as the ravine where he was found. The role of the Aitu in the local narrative provides a fascinating and disturbing cultural counterpoint to the forensic evidence. For many of the inhabitants of Tutuila, the forensic report was not a discovery of a crime, but a description of a spiritual event. In their worldview, the blade was not held by a murderer in the Western sense, but by a protector of the land's sanctity. This belief has allowed the community to absorb the tragedy without the need for a human scapegoat or a legal resolution. By attributing the violence to the spirits of the ancestors, they have moved the event out of the realm of criminal law and into the realm of sacred history. This cultural integration of the mystery is the primary reason why the person or persons unknown will likely never be named. The silence of the village is not a conspiracy to obstruct justice, but a commitment to a different kind of truth, a truth that prioritizes the protection of the land and its traditions over the requirements of a foreign judicial system. The mystery survives because it serves a function within the culture, acting as a permanent boundary marker for the land of the spirits. Modern technology, while capable of mapping every inch of the island's surface, remains powerless to penetrate the social and historical layers of the photographer's death. We live in an age of total visibility, where drones and satellites have stripped away much of the world's geographical mystery. But the secret of the northern cliffs is not a geographical one. It is a human one. The truth is not hidden in the rocks or the trees, but in the memories and the silence of the people who call that landscape home. Even if a modern investigator were to return to the site today, they would find only the same overgrown ravine and the same indifferent ocean. The physical evidence has long since been reclaimed by the earth, and the human evidence has been protected by the passage of time and the changing of generations. The case reminds us that there are still depths that technology cannot reach, and that the most profound mysteries are often the ones that are held in the hearts of a community rather than the files of a laboratory. The legacy of the photographer's work is another tragic dimension of the story. He went to Tutuila to capture a pure, unvarnished truth, to document a world that he felt was slipping away. But the world he found was far more complex and dangerous than he could have imagined. His death was the ultimate irony of his profession, the observer becoming the observed, and the documenter becoming a mystery. The destruction of his final images means that his artistic journey ended in a total visual vacuum, leaving behind only the cold, clinical descriptions of a coroner's report. We are left to wonder if the images he was chasing were worth the price he paid, or if his quest for the perfect frame was a fatal misunderstanding of the landscape he was trying to capture. The case stands as a haunting meditation on the ethics of exploration and the potential consequences of looking too closely at a place that does not want to be seen. In the final reflection, the case of the murdered photographer at Tutuila is a story about the permanence of silence. The island has a way of absorbing violence and folding it into the beauty of its landscape until the two are indistinguishable. The waves that crash against the northern cliffs today are the same waves that the photographer heard during his final 48 hours. And they continue to drum out a rhythm of absolute indifference. The person or persons unknown who held the blade have likely passed into history themselves, taking the truth of their motives and their actions to the grave. What remains is the atmosphere of the place, the heavy mist, the vertical drops, and the sense that you are being watched by something ancient and uncompromising. The photographer's story has become a part of that atmosphere, a ghost in the machine of the island's modern identity. He is a permanent resident of the northern cliffs, a man who sought the light but found only the shadows of the abyss. As we close this long and difficult narrative, we must accept that there will be no final revelation, no sudden confession, and no discovery of a hidden camera. The mystery of Tutuila is complete in its incompleteness. It is a story that exists in the space between the physical evidence of the blade and the spiritual reality of the Idu, a space that the law cannot fill and the world cannot touch. The photographer went into the mist looking for a masterpiece, and he found it, though not in the way he intended. His masterpiece is the mystery itself, a narrative of bone and blade that will haunt the South Pacific for as long as the jungle continues to grow and the ocean continues to roar. The case of the missing and murdered photographer remains an open wound on the heart of the island, a chilling reminder that in the wild, ancient places of the earth, the truth is not a prize to be won, but a secret to be respected. The story ends where it began, in the silence of the ravine, in the shadow of the jungle, and in the eternal, terrifying beauty of the unknown. There is nothing left to say, and nothing left to find. The island has spoken, and its word is silence. The files can be returned to their drawers, the recordings can be stopped, and the world can turn its attention to the next mystery. But for those who have followed this journey into the dark heart of Tutuila, the image of the man in the mist will never truly fade. He remains there, standing on the edge of the plateau, looking through a viewfinder at a world that is about to swallow him whole. We are left only with the echo of his footsteps and the memory of a blade in the green shadows. A story that tells us more about ourselves and our desire to know than it does about the island he sought to capture. The photographer is gone, the mystery remains, and the mist continues to roll in from the sea, keeping its secrets as it has done for 10,000 years. The case is closed, the truth is buried, and the silence of the northern cliffs is the only answer we will ever receive. The journey into the unknown has reached its final destination, and that destination is a void that no amount of time, light, or evidence can ever hope to fill. The photographer at Tutuila is no longer a victim or a subject. He is the mystery itself, a permanent part of the island's dark and beautiful soul. There are no more frames, no more words, only the long, slow passage of the Pacific tide over a truth that will never be told. The ultimate resolution of any true crime narrative often remains frustratingly elusive, yet in the case of the photographer who disappeared into the shadows of Tutuila, the lack of a legal conclusion has birthed a different kind of permanence, a narrative that lives in the space between history and myth. As we reach the final chapter of this long and shadowed journey, we are forced to look beyond the brittle police files and the rusted remains of a Leica camera to consider the true weight of what it means for a story to remain unsolved in the modern era, where information is ubiquitous and every corner of the globe is mapped by satellites. The persistence of the Tutuila mystery serves as a chilling reminder that there are still depths of the human experience that cannot be illuminated by technology. The case is no longer just a series of forensic facts about sharp force trauma or a timeline of a missing person. It has become a meditation on the fundamental boundaries of our world. It is the story of a man who traveled across an ocean to capture the unseen, only to become a part of the unseen himself, leaving behind a legacy that is defined not by the light he recorded, but by the darkness that eventually claimed him. When we reflect on the most disturbing element of this case, the 48 hours of survival that the photographer endured after the initial attack, we are confronted with a horror that transcends simple criminality. This was not a quick departure or a sudden accident. It was a 2-day struggle in the most vertical and unforgiving landscape of the Pacific. In those hours, the photographer was trapped in a terrifying duality. He was alive, yet he was already a ghost to the world above. He lay in a ravine that was geographically just a few hundred yards from the paths the search parties would eventually tread. Yet he was psychologically and physically 1,000 miles away from rescue. In those final 48 hours, the photographer's relationship with the land he loved must have undergone a radical and terrifying transformation. The beauty he had come to document, the giant tree ferns, the vertical cliffs, the swirling morning mist, became the walls of his prison. The very isolation he had sought out for his art became the instrument of his demise. This period of survival is the silent center of the mystery, a 48-hour void that holds the truth of his suffering and the identity of his assailant. Yet it is a void that will never be filled by the voice of the victim. The physical evidence of the blade, the mechanical nicks on the ribs, and the femur remains the one undeniable anchor of the homicide theory, a signature of human violence that refuses to be softened by the passing of 50 years. Those marks are more than just forensic data. They are a direct link to the hand that held the tool. On an island like Tutuila in the 1970s, the machete was the primary tool of existence, used for the most peaceful and productive tasks of village life. To think that this ubiquitous object was transformed into a weapon of such deliberate and prolonged violence adds a layer of domestic terror to the tragedy. It suggests a killer who was not a stranger from a different world, but a person who understood the rhythm of the land and the absolute silence of the northern cliffs. The mystery of the person or persons unknown persists because the weapon was a part of the landscape itself, a tool that could be used to commit a crime and then returned to its peaceful purpose within the hour. This realization creates a haunting sense of proximity, a feeling that the truth was always just within reach, walking the same paths and tending the same plantations as the investigators who searched for it. The silence of the local community, which initially seemed like a bureaucratic or investigative hurdle, must be understood in the context of cultural survival. The people of the northern coast were not merely protecting a murderer. They were protecting a way of life and a spiritual heritage that they felt was under siege. In their eyes, the photographer's intrusion into the land of the spirits was a transgression that the law of the courthouse could not address. By maintaining their silence, they ensured that the island's internal equilibrium was preserved and that the Aido remained the ultimate arbiters of justice in their domain. This collective silence is perhaps the most powerful consequence of the case, a wall of protection that has stood for over half a century. It reminds us that the truth is often a matter of perspective, and that what the West sees as an unsolved murder, the island may see as a settled spiritual debt. This cultural impasse is the primary reason why no name was ever added to the police file, and why the person or persons unknown will forever remain a part of the island's dark and protective mythology. The destruction of the photographer's final roll of film remains the ultimate tragic symbol of his failed quest. As a landscape artist, he believed that a photograph was a way of claiming a truth, of freezing a moment of beauty forever. But the island of Tutuila reclaimed that truth, ensuring that the only record of his final journey was a roll of ruined, chemical-stained celluloid. This loss of the decisive moment is a profound metaphor for the limits of our ability to document the world. We are left with a void where a masterpiece should have been, a visual silence that forces us to rely on our imagination to reconstruct the photographer's final perspective. Did he capture the faces of the people who confronted him? Did he record the beauty of the northern coast before the mist closed in? The absence of these images ensures that the photographer's legacy is not one of clarity, but of mystery. He went to Tutuila to show the world what he saw, but instead he became something that the world can only wonder about. As we look at the case from the perspective of 2026, we see a story that has been folded into the very atmosphere of American Samoa. The northern cliffs are still there, as vertical and intimidating as they were in the 70s, and the mist still rolls in with a silent, ancient regularity. The ravine where the remains were found has been reclaimed by the jungle, its jagged stones covered in black moss and its dark depths hidden by the giant fronds of the tree ferns. The island has a way of absorbing trauma, of turning violence into a part of the natural cycle. The death of the photographer is no longer a current event. It is a part of the land's memory, a story that the wind tells in the high plateau. The case remains open in the technical sense, but in the spiritual sense, it has been closed for decades, settled by the land and the people who live there. The photographer is a permanent ghost of the cliffs, a man who sought to conquer the landscape with his lens but was ultimately conquered by the landscape itself. The human cost of this mystery, the lifelong grief of a family, and the professional loss of an artist is a weight that no podcast or investigative report can truly alleviate. They are left with the open verdict of a court that could not find a killer and the open wound of a loss that has no ending. Their tragedy is the real-world consequence of a collision between two incompatible worlds. The photographer's ambition was to see, but the island's ambition was to remain hidden, and the result was a violence that neither side could have fully predicted. As we conclude this series, we must acknowledge that justice, in the way the West defines it, will likely never come to the northern cliffs of Tutuila. There will be no final confession, no discovery of a hidden blade, and no legal closure. The case of the missing and murdered photographer will remain one of the Pacific's most enduring mysteries, a chilling reminder of the power of the unknown and the resilience of a culture that chooses its own silence. The ultimate reflection of this case is found in the ocean that surrounds the island, an endless, rhythmic force that has watched the entire tragedy unfold from the first step into the mist to the final extraction from the ravine. The Pacific does not care about police files, forensic reports, or the reputations of photographers. It only knows the constant battering of the waves against the stone and the slow passage of time. The mystery of Tutuila is a part of that rhythm now, a story that has been washed clean of its immediate terror and turned into a permanent, atmospheric truth. We are left only with the image of a man walking into the fog, a Leica camera around his neck and a vision in his heart, heading toward a destiny that the world was never meant to understand. He was a seeker of the unseen, and in the dark heart of the Tutuila cliffs, he finally found it. The story ends as it began, in the silence, in the mist, and in the eternal, terrifying beauty of the island that refuses to tell its secrets. The photographer's journey is now a part of the air we breathe when we think of the South Pacific, a cautionary tale about the price of curiosity and the boundaries of the sacred. The person or persons unknown are a part of the soil now, and the truth of those 48 hours of survival is a secret held by the Aitu. We can look at the vertical cliffs and the deep ravines, and we can speculate about the blade and the motive, but the island will only ever offer us its silence in return. The case is closed, the files are archived, and the photographer is at rest in a distant land, but the mystery of Tutuila lives on, a haunting and beautiful echo of a crime that the world saw. But the island never allowed it to touch. There are no more words to write and no more frames to capture. The story of the man in the mist is finished, leaving us only with the long, slow whir of the Pacific and the enduring darkness of the abyss. The mystery remains, as permanent as the volcanic rock and as elusive as the morning mist, a final testament to the power of the unknown in a world that tries too hard to see everything. The photographer found his frame, but it was a frame that the world was never meant to see, and with that, the silence of Tutuila becomes the final and only answer we will ever have. The enduring legacy of the Tutuila case is not found in a courtroom verdict or a signed confession, but in the profound, heavy silence that continues to hang over the northern cliffs of the island more than 50 years after the photographer's disappearance. To truly understand the weight of this silence, One must look past the clinical language of the forensic reports and the bureaucratic stagnation of the police files, and instead contemplate the absolute isolation of the photographer's final experience in the context of a world that was still vast, analog, and largely disconnected. In the realm of true crime, we often focus on the who and the how, seeking a tangible villain and a clear sequence of events that lead to a definitive end. But the Tutuila mystery defies this desire for closure, presenting us instead with a series of haunting, unanswered questions that challenge our fundamental understanding of justice, culture, and the natural world. The fact that the photographer survived for at least 48 hours after the initial attack is perhaps the most significant and distressing detail of the entire investigation, as it creates a temporal space where the truth was alive but unreachable, a window of time where a human soul was suspended between the world of the living and the eternal shadows of the abyss. This 48-hour period represents a profound void in the historical record, a time when the photographer was no longer a visitor or an artist, but a witness to a reality that he would never be able to share with the rest of the world. In those hours, he lay at the bottom of a deep volcanic fissure, surrounded by the overwhelming, chaotic noise of the Pacific Ocean crashing against the dark stone walls and the suffocating green density of the rainforest that pressed in from all sides. The air would have been thick with the scent of damp moss, rotting vegetation, and the salt spray of the sea, a sensory experience that was as beautiful as it was lethal. During this time, he was geographically just a few hundred yards from the very paths where the search parties would eventually tread. Yet he was psychologically and physically 1,000 miles away from any hope of rescue. He was a man who had spent his life observing the world through a precision lens, now forced to experience the world in its most raw, unmediated, and terrifying form. This period of survival is the silent center of the mystery, a 48-hour struggle that stands as a testament to human endurance and a haunting reminder of the absolute loneliness of death in the wild. The signature of the blade on the victim's bones, those precise, mechanical nicks on the ribs, and the femur remains the ultimate indictment of the island's attempt to label the death an accident. These marks are the only surviving witnesses to the presence of another human being in that forbidden territory, a physical record of an intentional act of violence that refuses to be softened by the passage of time. On an island like Tutuila in the 1970s, the machete was the primary tool of existence, a ubiquitous object used for the most peaceful and productive tasks of village life. To think that this domestic tool was transformed into a weapon of such deliberate and prolonged violence adds a layer of quiet horror to the tragedy. It suggests a killer who understood the rhythm of the land and the absolute silence of the northern cliffs, someone who could commit an act of violence and then return to the peaceful routine of their community within the hour. This realization creates a haunting sense of proximity, a feeling that the truth was always just within reach, walking the same trails and tending the same plantations as the investigators who searched for it. For the people of Tutuila, the concept of the Aitu is not a primitive superstition to be dismissed by modern science, but a foundational element of their relationship with the land and their ancestors. When the forensic evidence suggested a human hand and a sharp-edged tool, it did not necessarily contradict the local belief in spiritual retribution. In the cultural logic of the island, a person acting to protect a sacred boundary or a disputed family estate is often seen as an extension of the land's own will, an instrument of a larger, older justice. This creates a formidable barrier for any traditional legal investigation, as the community's loyalty to its ancestral laws and its spiritual entities will always outweigh its obligation to a foreign judicial system. The silence that met the investigators in the northern villages was not a sign of indifference or a conspiracy to hide a criminal. Rather, it was an act of profound cultural defense. It was a refusal to allow the complexities of their social and spiritual life to be reduced to the binary terms of guilty or innocent as defined by a distant government. This impasse ensures that the identity of the person who held the blade will likely remain a secret passed down through whispers, a part of the island's internal equilibrium that the outside world is simply not permitted to touch. The 1970s represented a unique moment in the history of global travel, a time when a man could truly lose himself in a landscape that had not yet been fully cataloged by the digital eye. Today, in 2026, we live in a world where the idea of the unknown has become an endangered species. We have satellite maps that can zoom in on the very ravine where the photographer was found, and we have communication networks that make total isolation nearly impossible. Yet, the Tutuila case reminds us that even in an age of total visibility, there are still parts of the human story that remain in the dark. The destruction of the photographer's final roll of film is the ultimate metaphor for this limitation. It is a visual void that represents all the things we can never truly know about another person's experience, especially when that experience takes place in the vertical. Green shadows of a place like the Northern Cliffs. The ruined film is a reminder that some truths are too fragile to survive the transition from the wild to the civilized world. And some images are meant only for the eyes of the land and the spirits who guard it. The human cost of this mystery is most poignantly felt in the void left in the lives of the photographer's family, who have lived for 50 years with a story that has no ending. For them, the island of Tutuila is not a paradise of coral reefs and white sand, but a site of permanent, unresolved grief. They are left with the open verdict of a court that could not find a killer and the open wound of a loss that has no closure. Their tragedy is the real-world consequence of a collision between two incompatible worlds, the world of the observer and the world of the observed. The photographer's ambition was to see, but the island's ambition was to remain hidden, and the result was a violence that neither side could have fully predicted or understood. Their mourning is a silent, enduring echo of the tragedy, a reminder that the ripples of a crime committed in a remote tropical ravine can reach across an entire ocean and last for a lifetime. The role of the Leica camera in this story is equally symbolic of the limits of our desire to document the world. The camera was a masterpiece of human engineering, a device built to withstand the harshest environments and to provide an objective record of the truth. Yet, in the deep ravine of Tutuila, it proved to be as fragile as the man who carried it. The destruction of the glass lenses and the seizing of the mechanical gear serve as a metaphor for the failure of the modern world to fully grasp the reality of the ancient one. The ruined film is a testament to the fact that some truths are too intense, too violent, or too sacred to be captured and preserved. We are left with a story that is told in the language of bone and blade, rather than the language of light and shadow. This shift in the narrative medium is the ultimate consequence of the crime, ensuring that the photographer's final contribution to the world was not a visual masterpiece, but a haunting, unanswered question. As we conclude this deep dive into the mystery of the island of Tutuila, we are left with the image of the Northern Cliffs, standing as they have for millennia, indifferent to our questions, our cameras, and our forensic reports. The case is closed, the files are archived, and the photographer is at rest in a distant land, but the mystery remains, a permanent resident of the mist-choked peaks of American Samoa. It is a story about the permanence of silence and the enduring power of the unseen. The person or persons unknown who held the blade have likely passed into history themselves, taking the truth of their motives to the grave, while the land continues to guard its secrets with a silent, ancient indifference. The photographer went into the mist looking for a masterpiece, and he found it, though not in the way he intended. His masterpiece is the mystery itself, a narrative of bone and blade that will haunt the South Pacific for as long as the jungle continues to grow and the ocean continues to roar. The final word on the matter belongs not to the police, the lawyers, or the historians, but to the island itself. Tutuila has moved on, its beauty remains as staggering as ever, and its secrets remain as deeply buried as the day they were first created. The mystery of the 70s has become a part of the island's breathing tropical reality, a story that is told by the wind in the tree ferns and the rain on the volcanic rock. We are left only with the reflections, the image of a man seeking the light, the glint of a hidden blade, and the 48 hours of silence that followed. The truth is there, somewhere in the narrow crevasse behind the giant ferns, but it is a truth that the world is not permitted to know. The case of the missing and murdered photographer remains an open wound on the heart of the island, a chilling reminder that in the wild, ancient places of the earth, The truth is not a prize to be won, but a secret to be respected. The story ends where it began, in the silence of the ravine, in the shadow of the jungle, and in the eternal, terrifying beauty of the unknown. There is nothing left to say, and nothing left to find. The island has spoken, and its word is silence. The files can be returned to their drawers, and the recordings can be stopped. But for those who have followed this journey into the dark heart of Tutuila, the image of the man in the mist will never truly fade. He remains there, standing on the edge of the plateau, looking through a viewfinder at a world that is about to swallow him whole. We are left only with the echo of his footsteps and the memory of a blade in the green shadows. A story that tells us more about ourselves and our desire to know than it does about the island he sought to capture. The photographer is gone, the mystery remains, and the mist continues to roll in from the sea, keeping its secrets as it has done for 10,000 years. The journey into the unknown has reached its final destination, and that destination is a void that no amount of time, light, or evidence can ever hope to fill. The photographer at Tutuila is no longer a victim or a subject. He is the mystery itself, a permanent part of the island's dark and beautiful soul. There are no more frames, no more words, only the long, slow passage of the Pacific tide over a truth that will never be told.